Yes, sir. Councilmember Polito,
Here.
Councilmember Hawkins,
Here.
Councilmember Lewis,
Here.
Vice Mayor Widmer,
Yes, here.
and Mayor DeGolia.
I'm here,
Thank you.
and we need to do the Pledge of Allegiance. I always put the roll call first for some reason.
I want to make sure we're here.
I pledge allegiance
To the
to the
flag
flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation,
under
under
God,
God,
indivisible, with
with liberty
liberty
and
and
justice
justice
for all. That pledge is particularly relevant as we get nightly news on Ukraine. Okay, public comment. I have a hand from Bob. Is your hand up, Bob?
I didn't mean it to be up. Hold on
Or
here.
are you still pledging?
Yeah, maybe I don't know what happened.
Okay.
It's down now.
You have a couple
Okay.
of presentations as well, Mr. Mayor.
So-
Couple of presentations before public comment.
Oh, you're right. Okay, you're right. Sorry about that.
I know that Commander Larson's here, who, and I think we have retiring Sergeant Detective Mr. Kokler online.
There he is. I see him. Anthony.
Great.
And we also
back.
have Christy Cisco for dispatcher. And
Okay,
community
let's do the proclamations first. And the first proclamation is in recognition of Atherton Police Sergeant and Detective Anthony Kokler.
No.
We're very sorry to see you go. It's been such a long time. Outdates all of us. Whereas Anthony Kokler, a veteran police officer with over 26 years of service to the town of Atherton. And whereas the City Council of the town of Atherton, along with the entire community, would like to honor the contributions that Sergeant Kokler has made during his law enforcement career. And whereas Anthony's involvement started as a police recruit, where he graduated from the police academy on May 24th, 1996, was placed in the field training program and quickly moved up the ranks as a traffic officer, motor officer, field training officer, school resource officer, child safety seat technician, Lexipol coordinator, field evidence technician, and acting sergeant, which all has made him an invaluable asset to this organization. We didn't mention sergeant, not the least of which he's retiring as. Whereas Anthony was promoted to sergeant in 2008, which included traffic and detective, he has worked tirelessly over the years to assist the police department, which kept the agency running efficiently with his institutional knowledge, multitasking abilities, and his can-do and right now attitude, while also winning the Mothers Against Drunk Driving DUI Award, the AFIS Fingerprint Award, which led to the arrest of a suspect, and Employee of the Quarter in 2012 and 2021, Employee of the Year in 2021, and was currently also working as the interim code enforcement officer. And now, therefore, as mayor of the town of Atherton, on behalf of the entire Atherton City Council, I hereby commend the outstanding dedication and loyalty performed by Anthony Kokler during his law enforcement career and wish him the best in his well-deserved retirement. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
If you'd like to say anything, Anthony, you're welcome to. You, not necessary.
I just like to thank everybody. I mean, I had a really good career. It was a really good long run, and had a good time there. Got to do a lot of stuff. Enjoyed working with everybody, and wish everybody, the best of luck going forward. And hope the department continues to excel and move forward positively. So thank you, everybody, for everything that you've done.
Thank you. We will indeed miss you.
Thank
I
you.
have a question for him, Mr. Mayor.
Please.
Out of all of your roles, traffic officer, motor, FTO, SRO, all of that stuff, all the way up to code enforcement officer. Which one did you like the least?
The least,
Yes.
Oh, the least.
definitely code enforcement. That definitely was the one I liked the least.
Hey now, Sarge.
That's a tough job. That gives us respect for everyone who does it.
But I know Lisa's going to do a great job, so you guys are in good hands.
Thank you. I
Great.
appreciate the support.
Well, you're gonna get it.
In your retirement, we hope you remember 1 steering wheel, 4 seats, and 4 floor mats.
That's right. Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you, everybody. I appreciate it.
You will be missed. You were
Thank you.
Yeah,
such a
thank you enough.
great addition to our force. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Anthony, if I could just, I'd just like to say, Anthony, thank you for your 26 years of service that you gave to the Atherton Police. Your tireless work ethic and professionalism has set the tone for the rest of the department. You've worn your uniform and badge with pride, and as you retire, you can look back on your service you gave with honor. We wish you the best and all of your luck in future endeavors, and you are missed at the police department already.
Thank you, Dan. And I miss being with you guys too. But, you know, life goes on and everything will work out. So best of luck to everybody.
Thank you. Thank you.
All right. Thank you.
That's a hard thank you. It's deep. Okay. I also have a proclamation for public safety communications personnel. And this is the proclamation. Whereas the City Council of the Town of Atherton, along with the entire community, would like to honor the contributions of all communications personnel in the public safety arena for the continued efforts to preserve public safety through our 911 non-emergency lines and dispatch of our police personnel to thousands of calls for service each year across the nation. And whereas each year, the second week of April is dedicated to the men and women who serve as public safety telecommunicators. It was first conceived by Patricia Anderson of the Contra Costa County Sheriff's Office in 1981 and was observed only at that agency for 3 years. Members of the Virginia and North Carolina chapters of the Association of Public Safety Communications Officials became involved in the mid-1980s, and by the early 1990s, the National APCO organization convinced Congress of the need for a formal proclamation. Representative Edward Markey introduced what became House Resolution 284 to create National Public Safety Telecommunicator Week. According to congressional procedure, it was introduced twice more in 1993 and 1994, and then became permanent without needing the need for yearly introduction. And whereas the City Council of the Town of Atherton would like to declare National Public Safety Telecommunications Week, the week of April 10th to 16th, which has been set aside so everyone can be made aware of the hard work and dedication performed by public safety telecommunicators, which provides a vital link to the public safety services on which we have come to rely every day. And anyone who goes to the police office knows that because it's the dispatcher that you first meet. And whereas the City Council and the Town of Atherton wish to thank them for all the sacrifices they make to create a better and safer world for the public, their commitment to the profession is appreciated by the public safety communications community and the citizens we serve. And now, therefore, as Mayor of the Town of Atherton, on behalf of the Atherton City Council, I hereby commend the outstanding service performed by our telecommunications personnel. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
If you want to say anything, Christy, you're welcome to, but it's totally unnecessary.
Thank you for honoring us, and we absolutely love what we do, and we are so pleased to be with the Town of Atherton. We truly do love what we do and helping the people in the community. So thank you.
It's truly a pleasure to go into your office, and you guys are really helpful.
Good, thank you.
And the other week during my one-on-one, George and I went in there and we looked at the at the reports that come in from the alarms. If any of you on the council haven't done it, they get a lot of reports, most of which are, they don't have to do much with other than recognize, but there's an amazing number of reports they get every single day. It's worth looking at that system. It's a special little telecommunications box.
Through the mayor, I have.
Yes, please, Elizabeth.
Yes. So I just want to say thank you very, very much for your service and for how polite and helpful you are when a resident calls. And when I called the other night, the power had gone out, and I called and I was directed directly to the PD, and you were very patient and kind and, helpful, and walked me through a lot of what was going on. So I appreciate that very, very much. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Yeah, and I'd like to echo that, every time I've had any interaction, it's always been great, but I hear this from all the residents that say what a great job you do. And, they know many of you by name, and, they don't ever want you to leave or change jobs, so it's a testament to the work you do and the recognition from the residents.
Thank you
And
very
we're
much.
glad we got you a nice home now.
Yes, it's beautiful. Beautiful. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. So,
Sorry, Mayor, if I may.
no problem. Go ahead, Don.
To our dispatchers, I'd just like to say you are always there to answer the call, providing indispensable service 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. You truly are the unsung heroes of public safety. You are the calming voice on the other end of a 911 call and the link between a would-be deadly disaster and a life-saving rescue. It takes an exceptional and talented person to be the calm, collected voice in the middle of chaos. As an Atherton Police Department dispatcher, you played that vital role in keeping our officers, first responders, and residents safe. Thank you for all your hard work in the service to our department and the community. You are and always will be our first line of defense in protecting and helping our residents. So thank you.
Thank you, Commander.
Okay. Anyone else? Okay, now if I would read the agenda, I could see the proper order. The next thing is public comment. Do we have any public comment?
I don't see any hands, Mayor, but if you will allow me to just
Sure, go
comment.
ahead.
So for those joining by Zoom link, you can use the participants button and raise your hand. And if you're dialing in by phone, you can dial *9 to raise your hand, and we'll recognize you to make a comment. But I don't see anybody, Mayor.
Okay, so let's move on. The next item is the city manager's report.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of the council. In the interest of time for the night's meeting, you do have the written report as part of the agenda packet. Staff here to answer any questions the council may have on any specific items.
Any comments or questions? Okay, I don't see any comments or questions. So let's move on. The next item is the consent calendar, which addresses items 6 through 12. Does anyone on the council or from the public wish to pull anything or make a comment? Bill.
Yeah, I just have a comment on number 11. I can do it very quickly, but it's up to you.
Okay, let's just, George, you have a comment?
Just a note, Mr. Mayor and council, item number 7, the minutes needs to be pulled from the consent agenda. They weren't quite done. They'll be on the next council meeting.
Okay. Go ahead, Bill.
On page 96 on the report, it indicated that, we hadn't built the dorm yet. And while that is, I thought that we should, while that's the case, it is under construction and was under construction during 2021. And we had issued the permits for it even before the end of the fiscal year. And so I thought that we should at least recognize that in the report. Because I've heard for many, many years from people both at the state level as well as in the news media who were, writing up housing issues and things like that, we always have the school dorm as a an item that's gonna, add to what we're doing in Atherton, and then, but we never deliver it. It's just paperwork. So I think the fact that it's going on, we should at least recognize it in the comment section. Thanks. Other than that, I have no other comments.
Okay. So can we consider that addition an amendment, George?
Yeah, we can make a comment in there. It's not countable in terms of a housing unit, but we can certainly make a comment, as the council members were noted.
And just to clarify, it's not countable because a housing unit has to have bathroom and kitchen facility? And there's no kitchen facility at all?
Not in a single unit.
Not in a single unit.
They're community kitchens.
Correct.
Okay. Okay. So can I get a motion to approve the consent calendar with that amendment?
So move.
Second.
Okay.
Councilmember Polito,
Aye.
Hawkins,
Aye.
Councilmember Lewis,
Aye.
Vice Mayor Whitmer,
Yes.
and Mayor DeGolia.
All right.
Can I confirm who seconded the motion, please?
I did.
Thank you, sir.
Okay, and the next item on the agenda is item 13, which is a public hearing to introduce an ordinance to repeal and replace Chapter 8.14 Historical Artifacts of the Atherton Municipal Code and retitle that section Historic Preservation. So I'd like to open the public hearing and ask for, are you going to report on that, George?
No, I believe Stephanie is.
Yes,
Okay.
thank you, Mayor, City Manager. Good evening, Stephanie Davis, Principal Planner. So tonight the council is being asked to consider an introduction of municipal code amendments, which would create a comprehensive town historic preservation ordinance. The ordinance does propose to take the town's existing municipal code regulations that pertain to historic artifacts being such things as statues, fences, and fountains, and combine them with a series of new proposed regulations, which would pertain specifically to historic buildings. So the council has discussed this item at two prior study sessions back in both of March and December of last year. Following such a draft ordinance that did maintain all of the existing regulations pertaining to historic artifacts and proposed amendments related to both definitions, guidelines, and processes specific to historic buildings was presented to the Planning Commission in January and February of this year. At the last February meeting, the Planning Commission did have a vote of 4-1, recommending that the council adopt the draft ordinance as proposed. So the Planning Commission did not recommend any textual changes to the ordinance from the draft that is being presented to you tonight. The dissenting vote expressed concern with the additional workload that the creation of such ordinance would create, and that concern with the intent of individuals who would be applying for the subsequent historical contract, which I will be discussing momentarily. The intent not necessarily to preserve the historic character of the building, but simply just for the property tax savings. So the commission was unanimous in requesting, however, that should the ordinance get adopted, to that the ordinance itself be evaluated and reported back both to the Planning Commission and to the City Council after 1 year of implementation to gauge how much activity it may or may not be generating. So I'll briefly highlight the key components of the draft ordinance. I'd also like to note that joining us in the meeting tonight is Senior Appraiser Christine Taliba Aguirre from the San Mateo County Appraiser's Office. She is a senior appraiser who manages all of the Mills Act contracts throughout the county of San Mateo. And she's here at the end of my presentation or within, if the council would like, to answer any questions specific to the property tax relation to a historical property contract. So I would like to note that the ordinance is structured to address two somewhat separate but related components that would pertain to historic buildings. So the first being the both process and procedures for a property owner within town who wishes to voluntarily propose to designate their property historic. By doing such, the property would be formally listed on the town's to be created, not yet in existing, historical registrar, and would also be subject to future compliance with the California State Historic Building Code and necessitating the need to obtain a historical alteration permit from the town for any future physical improvements to such building. So the ordinance does not propose any limit on how many historic properties could potentially be designated within town. But again, the ordinance does outline a series of process and guidelines that must be met in order for the town to consider and ultimately approve such historical designation. So that historical registrar that I just mentioned would be a newly created document that would list all historical artifacts that are currently listed in the town's existing historical artifact inventory and would add to it any to be designated historic buildings at some point in the future to create one uniform document of any historic resource within town. So the second component of the proposed ordinance deals with Mills Act, or what we're referring to within the ordinance as historical property contracts. So such contracts would need to be requested only by the property owner after or simultaneous to obtaining approval from the town for the formal historical designation of the property. So if a property was to obtain historical designation, it does not automatically, nor is it required to request that additional layer of a historical property contract on top of the site. So again, the property owner would need to subsequently request consideration of such historical property contract, which would of course go through its own process with the town. And again, the historical property contracts as detailed in the staff report, the purpose of such contracts is that a property owner would receive reduced property taxes for the duration of the contract in exchange for the requirement and commitment that their historic building be maintained and preserved. So the actual property tax savings is calculated by the San Mateo County Assessor's Office through a relatively complex formula that is established by the California State Board of Equalization. Excuse me, in accordance with State Mills Act law. So part of that contract, which would get recorded against the property and run with the land, should that property be sold within the contract defined term, would be for the owner to develop a restoration, rehabilitation, and maintenance plan. And such plan would also be required to include details describing the nature, the cost, and the schedule of the preservation work improvements that were intended to be done on the site. Lastly, as it pertains to the historical property contracts, given discussion and direction from the council at their 2 prior study sessions, there is recommended language within the ordinance that proposes to limit that there would be no more than 5 contracts or $25,000 aggregate maximum property tax loss to the town at any one time. And those limitations were proposed as an attempt at minimizing any substantial financial impact to the town related to the property tax reductions. So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions that the council may have. And again, Ms. Taliva Aguirre is here on the call as well with any specific questions related to the property tax calculations. Thank you.
Questions? Bill?
Yeah, I thought that when we talked about this last time, there were two things that I didn't see showed up in here, and maybe that you're not allowed to do them. But one was some sort of assurance that the tax savings in total, we're only 8%. Our $25,000 is just 8% of what their tax bill is, but the whole tax bill gets reduced. So it would be, close to or equal to what they're putting into the building, because that's really what the intent of the tax thing is, not to do some minor stuff while you're saving substantial amounts. And the second thing that we discussed, which was, kind of in line with what's happened over in Lindenwood, that, is in some manner, that since the town is financing some of this, kind of in part, that there'd be some sort of obligation that the guy would have to have an open house, or people would be able to see the property at some point in time. Much the same as around Flood Circle. Marion Oster's has holes in her fences, so you can see the fountain and stuff like that. And we had discussed that as a council. I don't think we came to any real resolution, but I think that there were several people at least were interested in something like that. So I didn't see them in here. Is there a problem with putting them in, or can they be put in if in fact there's consensus?
Neither of those two components are integrated as draft language within the ordinance. However, it would be at the discretion of the council to direct those, if the ordinance was to be adopted, to direct those changes be integrated into a final ordinance for second reading if it gets that far.
I do just want to say that there are going to be other policy considerations. If you are going to require such property owner to make their property available for public inspection or an open house, we'd have to consider, that does provide exposure to that property owner to potential liability. And so there's some additional things that you should be thinking about if you were going to make that into a requirement.
Yeah, well, in Lindenwood, all they did was have spaces in their hedges so that people could see the fountains, for example. So in many cases, it's simple. In the case of 151 Laurel, well, he's on a flag lot that goes past 2 additional yards, so there's no one could ever see that unless they can walk down his driveway, So I don't know if he's going to apply. Seemed to be interested before.
Okay, well, we can discuss that, and I think people should make comments on that. I'm looking for other questions before we get into comments. Diana?
I was actually going to comment on what he was saying, but I do have one question not related to that. But I was curious, who creates the historical register? Whose job is that?
So town staff would create the registrar. However, the town council would be the ultimate authority in approving any historical designation of a property. So a property, for example, a hypothetical situation would be a property would need to submit an application in accordance with the guidelines and processes as drafted in the ordinance to consider becoming historically designated within the town. There's a series of criteria that the ordinance has included that would need to be demonstrated by the property requesting historical designation, specifically that there's elements of the house that meet the California State Secretary of Interior standards for historic buildings. This is a public hearing process as proposed that ultimately would go to the council for final review and approval. And if the council was to approve historical designation of the property, then such property would be included on this to be created town historical registrar. I would imagine it would look similar to what the town's existing historic artifact inventory shows, which are photographs and a complete historical evaluation prepared by a licensed historical architect or historian that vets that's consistency with the state standards.
So in the case of the houses that we're adding now, that's beyond just fixtures and things like that, is that list going to grow organically as people apply, or will the historian create an initial list? That's what I was trying to ask.
So a property owner would need to come to the town voluntarily and submit an application for the town to consider adding it to its historical registrar. And the property owner would need to obtain the services of a licensed historian or historical architect, at least the way that the ordinance is drafted, to create such evaluation and recommendation if such property would, in their professional opinion, be eligible for some type of historical designation. All of that then gets presented to the council for review, discussion, and ultimately a decision as to whether to include such property on its registrar.
So in short, the answer is no, it's not the town historian that does it. It's property owner driven.
So it organically gets built. So of the 70 to 80 houses that you identified, those people would have to voluntarily come forward and actually incur a price of, they'd have to pay for the historian as well.
Not for the historian. But
Not the
that,
town historian, but an evaluation of their property as historic.
okay, I have a question from Bob and then Elizabeth.
Yeah, the application fee, it's like other fees, we would just adjust that periodically as we saw fit.
Yes, the application fee would need to be established on the town's fee schedule, and it's just cost recovery. So there would be a fee study that would need to be conducted on what the appropriate cost would be to process such an application.
And the only, up until they decide to apply for a Mills Act tax reduction, the only effect of this process is that the historic property has to be maintained. It can't be torn down, subdivided, et cetera, et cetera. Is that correct?
Yes, well, I mean, they could propose to tear it down. It would need to go through the appropriate environmental review process. Likely, I would guesstimate at a level of either a mitigated negative declaration or an EIR. Now, whether that gets approved or not is another story. It depends on the scope of the work that they want to do.
I don't understand. Why would somebody want their property designated historic and then apply to tear it down?
I wouldn't imagine that would be the case, but should that happen, that would be the process that they would need to go through.
Okay, so my last question is, and this may be for our assessor there, this 25 properties or $25,000 limit.
Mhm.
First of all, and I think Bill alluded to this, is that $25,000 of Atherton's share of the property tax? Or
Yes,
20, it is?
yes.
Okay, so how, not having any idea what these property tax reductions are,
Mhm.
how realistic is that number? In other words, is the first house that applies for the Mills Act, is it gonna is it gonna hit $25,000? I mean, is that a realistic number?
So we did have the county appraiser run a hypothetical scenario on a property that was purchased in Atherton in 2020, and based on that purchase price and the formula then applied by the county assessor, they were able to calculate what the annual property tax savings would be to the property owner, and then subsequently what that reduction would be to the town's sliver of receipt. And that equated to slightly less than $5,000. So basically, at a property that was purchased in 2020 for around $8 million, the town, if they were to apply a Mills Act contract and it got approved, the estimate is that the town would lose slightly less than $5,000 annually with the implementation of a Mills Act contract.
Okay, so the 5 houses and 25,000 are realistic numbers. That's what I was trying to discern. Okay.
And I don't know if Christine Taliva Aguirre wants to respond to that, but if you would like to, Christine, you're welcome to. And if anyone else has a question for Christine, I would encourage y'all to indicate that now so she can know. I don't want her to have to hang around for a very long discussion. I'd rather address her issues as soon as we can.
Good evening, everyone. Stephanie is correct. I was looking at one property and this one sold. It sold for a little bit over 8 million. It was like 8.1. And the 1% savings, if it was not owner occupied, was $36,000 and change, and it comes out to about, if you said it was 8% that you get out of the tax money, it comes out to close to $3,000, which would be your portion. If the property was owner occupied, hold on one second. If it was owner occupied, then the savings, then the money that you would not be receiving is about a little bit closer to $4,000.
Okay.
But the property owner, if it's owner occupied, they're saving like $47,000 in taxes based on the 2021 numbers. Does anybody else have any questions?
Okay, great. Thank you, Christine.
You're welcome.
I have a question, and just I'm observing that this new ordinance is addressing both the Mills Act issue, which are houses that would be deemed historic, and artifacts. So when we get into the discussion, I think there are two fairly different things, and we should separate that discussion. My question is on the artifacts. Stephanie, you referred to this inventory, and it refers, and the reference is like there's an actual inventory. And what I'm aware of is an inventory that the Heritage Association was involved in like 2006. And I don't believe has looked at it since then. So it's not a current item. And I wonder if that inventory is something that the council has approved.
That is the same inventory that I'm referencing within the staff report. And no, there has been no update since 2006. I have to check the date on it really quick. So that is correct.
But was that approved by the council, or is that just an inventory that the association happened to create?
That was an inventory that the Atherton Heritage Association created.
Okay. Okay, are there any other questions? Okay, then let's get into discussion. And seemed like there was more focus on the Mills Act housing situation. I'm happy to take that first if you'd like to. And I'll make a comment on Bill. The Bill brought up two issues, I think, as I think about them. One is whether we should require the homeowner that would be applying for the tax relief and the Mills Act designation, whether we should require them to actually do some work. I mean, I understand, and Stephanie, please correct me if my understanding is wrong, but I understand that there's a fairly detailed procedure that identifies what a clear and detailed statement of the proposed work and a whole list of items that are going to identify what the homeowner would propose to do. I'm not sure that we need to provide that they will do a dollar's amount of work that is at least as much as their tax savings. I'd like to know what other people think about that, but I do think that there should be some requirement of work if they're going to get this tax relief. We don't want them just to do a very small amount and get a $47,000 tax relief. With respect to showing it, I'm not sure how to deal with that. I think being able to maybe see the property from the street, I don't know how to deal with that. I'm not sure we should require that people allow the public to go in once a year and see their house. That seems rather invasive to me. So I don't feel so excited about that. I've got Diana and then Elizabeth.
I was just going to say on that same topic, what we could do instead of having people literally go in their house is to create a website about their house so that students and people can go and see the images instead of actually making people come in. Because I think it would be unsafe if you have a big fancy house and have people coming in. But I appreciate the sentiment that they're using public money, so the public should have access to it. But I think maybe creating a website like they do with real estate things and having them linked off our website would be a better way to go about that.
And the architectural report that's prepared as part of the process for facilitating this, they do come and take photographs of all aspects of the historic structure. So the city council could make those not only public records, but either facilitate that through the publication on the website or create a binder, so to speak, of all of the historic structures in the town.
I think Christine had a comment on that point as well.
Go ahead, Christine.
Thank you. So in the contracts that other cities have for the Mills Act, they have a schedule of repairs and upkeep that needs to be done specifically for like at least 10 years. And if the property owner does not keep up with these and these things are not checked off on their annual inspections, they can be taken out of the program, which means they lose their tax savings. The other thing is that generally the other properties are not, people are not allowed or to go into their homes, and the property owners are not required to let them go into their homes. Like the painted ladies in San Francisco, people can admire them all they want from outside, but unless the property owner just happens to want you to come in, they're not allowed into their homes. So I know that it's different with your artifacts and such, but to go into someone's personal space, that's generally not an option.
Okay. Okay, I've got Elizabeth and Bill, but George had his hand up and Stephanie has her hand up. No, George, Stephanie, do you want to go ahead?
Yes, just to Christine's point, as part of the proposed process in consideration of any future historical property contract, the way the ordinance is drafted, it does include specificity as part of the package that the council would be considering of this what we're calling a restoration, rehabilitation, and maintenance plan. And within that plan that the council would be reviewing is details, written narrative, and plans that specify the nature, the cost, and the schedule of all of the improvements. So there would be some numbers associated with the specificity of the work that is proposed. So you would be able to gauge generally how much monies the property owner would be intending to spend on what type of work throughout the duration of their contract.
Okay, great. Elizabeth, do you still have your hand up?
I do.
Okay, go ahead.
So I had a clarifying question at the beginning of the discussion, which I didn't get to ask for Stephanie in the form of when the resident makes application for historical criteria to the town, they don't have to also make it to the historical association on a national historic register, correct?
That's correct.
We're not requiring the resident to also make application to the National Historic Register.
Correct. We would not, that is not a requirement, is the draft ordinance.
Okay, because those requirements and that the resident would have to comply with. We're doing some of those, but not all of those. And I think part of the requirements are that the property or the artifact is, has to be made visible in some way to the public for viewing, but not necessarily to go in, as everyone is saying, inside. And I think some of the ideas that have been bantered about is good. The other thing is that with the tax savings that the resident is going to benefit from having Atherton accept it as a Mills Act or a historic property, those savings are supposed to go back into restoring and maintaining that historical monument, in my opinion. So I think to the extent that they do fix it up, maintain it, so that this historical artifact or home does not fall in disrepair, is really what we're losing property tax revenue in, and they are also benefiting from. So that was a comment. So I had a question and then a comment. Thank you.
Okay. Bill.
Yeah, just kind of clarifying and then an endorsement of an idea, but yeah, I wasn't implying people go inside a home, and that's I likened the comment to what they've done over on Fled Circle, and so just seeing things from the outside. I thought that Diana's comments about this is how it could be handled, I think that that's a great idea. I think that there should be some sort of analysis like, hey, here's this house, this is what made it historic, and why it got applied, and then some photos from it, at least from the outside, I think is a very appropriate requirement. So that's my comment. Thank you very much.
Great. Okay, additional comments? I'll make one comment on this issue about viewing the property. I think the idea of putting something on a website, I'm not exactly sure how that would happen, but I think that idea is a good idea. But I think that what we'd want to see is not just what's being proposed, it's really what the resulting restoration is, because the purpose of the work is to restore a historic building, to make it consistent with its history and presumably more beautiful than how it exists when the application is made. And it sounds like the ordinance requires them to provide a whole series of information when they are making the application. But I think and that's fine, we don't need to change that, but I think we should require that they provide images of what they have done of their property that is historic once the restoration is done. I think that's what the public would like to see.
Well, you see annual updates. You can show what's happening annually.
I was going to say, is there a timeline built into our ordinance for that? Because sometimes an annual would be good.
I think the ordinance is a 10-year deal, right? If somebody gets approved for the Mills Act, it's a 10-year deal. And my understanding of the way the taxes work is that they get this significant tax benefit for the 10 years. And after the 10th year, then it starts to tail off. It's not a sudden increase back up to 100%.
That's correct. It is a 10-year restoration and rehabilitation plan. As part of that plan, they have to identify the cost and the schedule of the intended repairs. It's not going to be a flat amount every year, because one year could be more expensive repairs than the next, so on and so forth. But just to respond to something that was previously mentioned also by Council Member Widmer about the public being able to have access. Our ordinance and our application process does require a component of the application to be able to demonstrate a public benefit. So not only is the property owner getting a benefit and being able to have tax savings and pouring that money back into the property, but in lieu of the Atherton residents obtaining that additional property tax revenue that it otherwise would, the applicant needs to provide that. But it's flexible enough to say we are open to having you explain to us how you plan on providing that public benefit. So by way of example only, right now it says you can allow periodic tours of your property, or you can commit that specified percentage of the property tax savings to rehabbing and upgrading the historical building. But the property owner is left with a little bit of flexibility on how they wish to do that. So, and that's already included in the packet before you.
But that doesn't sound like it includes what's been discussed in terms of images of the work that's done after it's done that can be shared with the public.
So the images are taken as part of the application process anyway, and
That's before the work's done. That's here we have an ugly building that's historic that they're going to take all the false siding off of the building so they get back to the original whatever craftsman structure or whatever it might be.
Correct. So those pictures, and we can add under, so this is on page 16 of 23, by the way, number 8. We can add a little Roman numeral 3 that says, and provide and make public pictures of the before and after of the historic structure and rehabilitation.
Great. Okay.
Oh yeah, number 7.
Diana, did you have your hand up? Okay. Any other comments on the Mills Act portion of this matter? Bill, George.
Just a note, the council doesn't have to approve a Mills Act application just because one's been submitted. And as part of that public benefit analysis, as the city attorney and Stephanie mentioned, you could probably request that the applicant provide additional progress photos as they go along, or anything specific like that that you see as a better public benefit than just if it's down a long driveway and you can't really get any access to see it.
Okay. Well, it sounds like we're going to add something in the language that Mona just referenced anyway. No, are there no further questions or comments on this portion? Then let's turn to the artifacts portion. Does anyone have any comments or questions on that? I do. So I'll go over mine. My first comment references this inventory. I don't like the way it's stated, because the way it's stated, this is on page 10 of 23. It's in the ordinance. It's item 814-200, item 4. It's one of the items that the city council can use to determine that an artifact is of local significance. It doesn't necessarily mean it is, but the city council has, it guides the city council that this is one thing that it can use, and that is that it's listed in the historic artifact inventory maintained by the Heritage Association. And there is such an inventory that, like I had mentioned earlier, was created about 15 years ago, but it's not something that, to my knowledge, has ever been updated. I know it's not, it hasn't been discussed in 8 years at the Heritage Association. And I'm uncomfortable that just having that, if it's an inventory, I like the idea that is suggested that we create a town inventory of both buildings and artifacts that are approved. And I understand we need to start somewhere, and we're going to, on the houses, we're going to let homeowners come and apply, and once we accept them, they go into the inventory. On artifacts, the only thing we're starting with is this inventory, but it doesn't sound like the inventory has ever been approved by the council. So I think the council needs to approve a list that we can start with this list and have it presented, but it needs to approve a list, and just having something identified by an organization that we have no connection with that could be a single person at some point in time makes me uncomfortable. Elizabeth, you're muted.
I know, I'm getting there. I was, so I was on the general plan when this list was created. This list came before the general plan. The Heritage Association hired a art historian from Stanford, I believe, to go through essentially Lindenwood and count statues, light poles, things like that, urns and things, and created a historical artifact list. I think I have the original document in a file box that I can pull out. But a lot of these artifacts or urns or statues are located on people's property. A lot of these properties since 2006 have been sold, homes torn down and rebuilt. So to say that that historical artifact list inventory is a true representation of what really is out there at this point in time, I think that that's would be hard for me to say that it is. And I think that we need to, if we're going to go down this road and put these historical artifacts in with this ordinance, that we need to re-verify that, and in order to really make it a historical artifact. A lot of these artifacts were, they're artifacts just because they've been in place for a long, long time. Many of them were not made out of good materials, and over time have maybe, disintegrated or become in disrepair. So I really think that before we go any further, we really need to have a complete understanding of what we're talking about here.
Okay. Yeah, I agree. I 100% agree with you. And I know the list. I've looked at it.
Mm-hmm.
It's in the Heritage Association also.
Mm-hmm. And they have pictures and descriptions and stuff of most of them.
Yeah, no, and it's comprehensive.
Mm-hmm.
It's just that the ordinance reads that being on a list maintained by the Heritage Association is sufficient for the council to determine it to be a historic artifact. And while that list that was done by the historians may be fine.
I'm just going to push back just a little bit, because supposedly this person was an official, and I see Lisa on the line because she was there too, and she was an official authenticator, right?
Yeah, but my point is, the way that this is stated, it is a list by, maintained by the Heritage Association, which isn't necessarily that list. In 5 years, it could be a list of 10 things that whoever is the Heritage Association in 10 years decides are relevant. So I think we need to be more careful with our language. George.
And perhaps Lisa and or Stephanie can opine in addition, but the inventory of historical artifacts is actually in our current code under the historical artifacts section, and it is designated as the official list of historical artifacts. So we've already got something like that codified within our code. And all this ordinance is doing is, I think, merging it into this particular section with respect to making it something the council can use, because it's already in our code designated by the council.
Well, then that would say that the council has approved the list. If it's in the code, it's been approved. My point was the language in this proposed ordinance just says a list maintained by the Heritage Association.
And that the Heritage Association could add to or delete by
That's
maintaining.
right. And the Heritage Association can be anybody in 10 years.
Yeah,
Right.
I
And I
agree.
think that's something that needs to be cleared up or clarified, that we're going to be maintaining that list.
Yeah.
But it is a list
my-
that exists.
My point is that this list that is, in our code and everything now, that could not be an accurate list after all those years and all of the ins and outs, because some of these artifacts had been found, overgrown, turned over in the back of, people's yards. And when they bought the house, started landscaping and, unearthing some of these urns that had been used as planters and things.
Yeah. Okay. So I think we should clean up that language. That was the point.
And
Bill.
clean up the list.
And the proposal is that we adopt a list, and this is just one criteria that we can use to deem that something is a historical artifact. And we just need to clean up the language, because it does. If it's referring to a list in the code, that's great. That solves my issue. Bill.
Yeah, so a long time ago, and when I first got on the council, I've heard from a number of people, because that's about the time, shortly before that is when they put this list together. And my understanding is the list was put together because there was some concern that people might be moving things out of Lindenwood, which had happened at one time. And they wanted to make sure that that didn't happen. But there were other things that got deemed historic that people had invested their own money in and brought down from, say, San Francisco and things like that, such as a fence at the end of Glenwood and Middlefield. And the guy wanted to paint it and clean it up, and he was told he couldn't do it because the council had passed this law. And so I really think that this historic artifact thing, I mean, I can see the Mills Act and all with homes, which are very expensive and things like that. Artifacts are a different thing. And I think that I support your position, Rick, that we should review that list, and also Elizabeth, because that list maybe has changed. But I think we should take a hard look at, what you can do, what you can't do, and things like that, because there was a lot of hard feelings with regards to that list got made and there wasn't communication. It wasn't like today where, George and Anthony send out a lot of documentation. Just one day the guy wanted to do something and somebody said to his fence that he bought, that he moved down here and installed on his property. And somebody says, nah, you can't touch that. That's just not right.
I agree with Bill that this is this list was created in an era of.
I might be able to short circuit this discussion a little bit. My recommendation is we can potentially delete that section in its entirety and simply rely on section 8.14.060 of the municipal code, which has a robust way of defining what criteria we can use to determine a historic artifact. And it does not include the problematic provision that you have all just explained, but it does rely, for example, on the National Register of Historic Places. It allows the council to make such determinations, and it establishes parameters for how it can do that. And it was previously adopted and it's codified in our code. So rather than coming up with two different criteria, we can rely on what we have already established.
But I think, Mona, what we're also saying is we need to review the list.
Agreed. And we can certainly bring that back, but just for the purpose of, and assuming that you even want artifacts to be included in Mills Act contracts, which is another question that you just raised, Councilmember Widmer, just answering the criteria piece, this would be, I think, a better resolution.
Yeah, I'm not interested in giving somebody a tax break because they have an urn left over when they when the flood house burned down and they just happened to buy that property.
There's no tax break for the artifacts. There's only tax breaks for the historic houses.
Right. I understand.
Okay, Bob.
I was going to suggest that we just drop paragraph 4 that refers to the Atherton Heritage Association, since I don't know who they are today, and none of us know who they're going to be tomorrow, and there's nothing, the council should approve what an artifact is. But Mona, are you saying you're going to pull the entire 8.14.200 relative to historic criteria for designating historic artifacts?
My recommendation is to pull it and have a sentence that says that the criteria for establishing historic artifacts is that is set forth in 8.14.060, and just rely on that.
And we don't have a copy of that in this.
I will copy and paste it into the chat right now.
All right, cool.
I thought the intent of this section here, the 8.14 section that is proposed, was to replace the old 8.14 in its entirety.
I did too.
In which case that 8.14.606 would be eliminated.
Yep.
Yeah, that's what is confusing me.
Well, I'm going to copy and paste this, and if you prefer this language, we can just rely on what is already existing.
Okay, great. So we can work that out on the second reading, I think. Okay, I had another comment. I actually had 2 more comments, and these deal with 8.14320. And well, there's a typo. If you go to page 13 of 23, there are 2 8.14.320s. So I assume the second one is supposed to be 330, or it's got to be a different number. So I'm sure that's an easy fix.
Yeah.
Both, let's see, I think both of these sections deal with alteration permit application process for both historic artifacts and historic houses. That's the first 8.14320, and the second 8.14320 deals with Planning Commission consideration for alteration permit applications. So it's dealing with the application process, both the initial and an application process that would be for an alteration. And my comment is that the items that are detailed 1 through 6 in section A of the first one and 1 through 3 in section B of the second one purportedly deal with both artifacts and houses. But in fact, there's just a few of them that deal with both artifacts and houses, and some of them that deal with only houses. And I think that we don't need to work through exactly what's what, but I think it needs to be clarified, because right now it reads as though they deal with both of those sections deal with both artifacts and houses, when they don't. Some of them only deal with houses. And I'm happy to leave that to Stephanie to work out.
I thought we were deleting the artifact.
No, what Mona suggested was deleting the criteria that the council would use for determining whether something is a historic artifact or house. That was what that section was. And she was suggesting using the language that's already in the code.
Or artifact.
She just sent to us on chat.
Yeah.
But that doesn't delete artifacts from this whole section. Bill.
So are we proposing that if somebody wanted to change something, such as, let's say Marion Oster, when she fixed her fountain, that she would have to go to the planning commission with an application, have to pay a fee to spend $100,000 to fix her fountain? Why would we want to burden somebody with that? But they're doing a service and they're updating it. And so we're saying, well, for the purposes of making, preserving something, we're going to charge you, $500 additional. And we're going to have a bunch of people that are appointed, not elected, decide whether or not you can even do it. I'm against that.
Definitely.
Thank you. So in that particular example of maintenance of a fountain or reconstruction of a fountain due to some kind of something happening to it, that type of activity within page 12, section 8.14.300 would not go through the historical alteration permit process. Historical alteration permits would be specific to the items, the 6 items listed in section, also on page 12, 8.14.310, major alterations, full demolition, complete removal, complete relocation, substantive change to the exterior architectural feature. So any kind of ordinary maintenance or repair to an artifact would not be subject to that alteration permit and process.
I can't say what condition the fountain was before she got it done, but I do know that it cost her $100,000 to fix it. So, and she had to take it down and send it to Washington, DC. So I would think, I think that this part, artifacts need to have a little more consideration and discussion. I'm serious about it.
Diane.
I just want to clarify, are we saying that if someone renovates an artifact, they don't get the same tax breaks as if they renovate a house that's a historical house?
No.
No tax breaks.
No tax breaks.
Why is that? Why aren't they handled the same?
Artifacts
The Mills Act.
Artifacts are
Real
considered,
property.
artifacts are considered personal property as distinguished by real property, which is subject to taxation.
But how do we get incentives for people to maintain these things if we can't give them a fiscal remuneration? So why wouldn't we be able to say if that, in the case that you talked about, the lady with the fountain, if she can prove that she's doing historic renovation to a thing that's on our list, why wouldn't you be able to take some portion of that renovation off her taxes? Just like you can take it off from a house.
Oh, wow.
Because it's not allowed.
What Bill is saying is that if we're wanting that, if the goal is to get them to maintain it, the way to do that is to give them incentives, not to make it harder you know what I'm saying? We're not doing that. I don't see where the incentives.
I wasn't saying that. I was just saying I didn't think they needed to pay for a permit and go through all that and have the planning commission approve it. What I was saying, I don't want to.
We're not setting tax law, Diana. This is a law that's a state of California tax law called the Mills Act that allows people to get a tax benefit because they do this to properties that are deemed historic properties. I mean, we can't do that. We don't have the authority to allow people to not pay their taxes because they're going to approve a historic artifact.
I thought the whole point of this, if I have a gate, so like, let's say my neighborhood, there's someone who's got a gate that's from an original gate. The house is there is not, but the gate is, and they've maintained the gate. It's in that book about Atherton. If that person, they own it, it is part of their property. Why are you just distinguishing something that's an object as being separate from what you own on your property? So I don't know, there should be a way to have it considered. So I misunderstood because I thought you were treating them all the same.
They're still considered personal property, not real property, and we don't have the authority to tax or not tax on them. But in following up on Bill's comment about the restoration issue, minor alterations, the current code already requires major alterations to go to the planning commission, changes in height or width, painting or otherwise covering previously unpainted, addition of new elements, fixtures, replacement of bases and sculptures, relocation of the structure, or relocation of an object or structure to another property. All of that already was required to go to the planning commission. And perhaps Marion's adjustment to her fountain should have gone to the planning commission as well. It may not have, but under our code, it's already required.
I
How
just
many
have to
people-
say, I think when Marion got her fountain, this was years and years ago. Again, this is like in the 2006.
Yeah, but this isn't when she got it. She did it this last year.
Oh, well, that's
That's a different issue. Bob,
Yeah, I'm not clear on where we're going on this artifact thing. I presume the purpose of it is preservation of legitimate historic artifacts. And therefore, before somebody can throw an urn in the dumpster, if we are crazy enough to put an urn on this list, they have to get permission. Now, I don't know what kind of enforcement mechanism we have, since we don't even know if the list we put together 15 years ago, if any of those things are still in existence. So
Well, that's what we said. We wanted to review the list.
I understand we would start by reviewing the list and maybe taking some items off the list and adding some items to the list.
right?
And the council would do that, not some association, heritage association.
Right.
But I'm still a little vague on where we go with this, and whether there's some overreach here. That's all.
there is overreach.
Yep. Let's take the artifacts out, and that way we can move forward with the Mills Act section.
We could do that. I would say that the one thing for artifacts that is good in this provision is that it creates a real artifact inventory that's approved by the council. That would be a good thing. I'd like to have that. There's no tax benefit for the artifacts, I think, and Mona or Stephanie can correct me, but I think the reason that the artifacts were initially included was because we were looking at the historic preservation issue for housing to comply with the Mills Act and to allow for Mills Act benefits to go to homeowners who go through this application process. And it made sense logistically to include artifacts as sort of, and at one point, I think there were historic trees included in here also. I don't have a problem with removing it. If y'all want to do that, that's fine with me. But I do think that there's a benefit to actually establishing what the list of historic artifacts are. And so at least that should be updated in our current ordinance. Elizabeth.
Okay, so if we're going to do that, I think that we should take a look at some of the historic brick or stone fences and colonnades, arches or something like that throughout the town, because I think that those are not necessarily on the list at this point. But those could also be incorporated into a property that I know there were some that were not allowed to be taken down when a property was redeveloped. And so I don't think the owner got any compensation or relief, from the Mills Act for the maintaining of those historic structures throughout town.
Bob.
We already have correct me if I'm wrong, we already have in the code a section on historic artifacts, correct?
Yes.
Mhm.
Yes.
So I would strip it from this because our original intent here was to get this Mills Act stuff taken care of.
Mhm.
I'd strip it from that, and then I would ask staff to bring back the artifact thing to us so we can get it cleaned up and treat it separately. These are two totally different things, real property and personal property.
Mhm.
And
Okay.
the real property thing, I think, is a slam dunk, and the artifact thing, I think, is a mess.
Okay, great. Mona?
Would you consider historic fences part of real property, like, stone walls and things? Would that be part of real property?
I'd have to ask Mona.
If it's affixed to the land, it's considered real property.
Mhm.
So certainly all of this is a policy decision. And if the council deliberates after public comment and directs staff to remove all of the historic artifacts from discussion, we can certainly do that. I just wanted to provide a little bit of context. This is in this ordinance because it's an existing component of the ordinance. So it was not an addition, right? The only real addition was the discussion of the Mills Act portion as it relates to real property. And secondly, the title of chapter 8.14 is historic preservation. And so I think that was the natural logic of it, is that if we're going to be talking about historic preservation, that whether it's artifact or buildings or property, they're all housed in the same chapter. I think I'm guessing as to the logic and desire of previous councils to have included that, but I have seen other cities put and preserve historic artifacts because it does give some benefit to the public and the community as a whole, and not, as Councilmember Polito said, dumping ancient urns in the garbage. On the other hand, there could be benefits to the owner of that artifact because the placement of it on a historic register could increase the valuation of it because now it's further recognized. But it's up to you all whether you want to do that or whether you think it's too onerous and you don't want to be in the business of regulating that. So we're happy to take whatever direction you provide.
Well, we have artifacts already in the ordinance, so we've already decided to regulate them. I think Bob's comment is well taken. That language needs to be cleaned up. And the purpose of this whole exercise is to deal with the Mills Act and approve the provisions for the Mills Act. I mean, if people want to get their artifacts registered in the National Register, they can always do that. They don't need us to help them. The purpose of why it was included, why the inventory was done, and why those items, why that provision is in the Atherton Code is because there was a huge controversy about people removing flood estate artifacts from Lindenwood. And to my knowledge, and I haven't really looked at it that carefully, but I'm pretty sure it's true, that the entire artifacts inventory list are things that were in Lindenwood. I don't think there's anything on that list. Maybe, I don't remember seeing anything on that list that isn't in Lindenwood. I think it was all done around the flood estate, and the Lindenwood Homeowners Association wanted to preserve the items, both streetlights and urns and fountains that were in Lindenwood and statues and associated with the flood estate. And I know that there were plenty of items that were being removed. So that's why it's in our ordinance.
Let's look at the list, Rick. Let's just review the list as a council, because I believe otherwise, because I've been told otherwise, that this guy's fence that came down from.
Well, no, that I considered in Lindenwood. You're right. I know all about it. That's a Huntington fence that came down from San Francisco that was put around the property. Right outside of the Lindenwood Gate.
Glenwood and Middlefield.
Yeah, Glenwood and Middlefield, right outside the Linden Gate.
Yeah.
Yep.
And
And
that house has a lot of historic, features to that too. But
so, okay, so the proposal that we've got from Bob is to remove the artifacts from this, to approve the Mills Act provision in this ordinance, and then to come back and I think we're all fine to have both the artifacts and the historic housing material put into one section of our code. I don't think that's the problem for efficiency purposes, but I think there's concern that the artifacts language needs to be worked on more, and the Mills Act's language is pretty much ready to go. Is that a fair summary?
Yeah, I think so.
I think
In
it's
other words,
gonna, it is
this
gonna
is
come.
just,
I was just gonna say, sorry, it is gonna come back to you looking differently because what's presented before you is a repeal and reenact, right? And so if you only want to keep the Mills Act contract or components of it, we're not going to be repealing and reenacting it because we have to keep and preserve the existing chapter 8.14. So we're not losing what we already have with respect to artifacts. We have to come back and separately amend that in the future.
Okay. Okay. I thought,
sounds good.
does everyone agree with that?
yes,
I think so.
yes.
It looks like that's the direction that we've got. Diana.
I am shocked that it's all just a flood estate. If you look at the historical book of Atherton on Selby Lane, there is a big gate and they have a whole thing about that gate, and that gate's not even in the list you just put up.
I understand. There are a number of older properties which you know well.
Yeah.
But that other,
I'm just telling you that this is why I raised the issue.
We'll look at the list and we'll make our own.
So we'll deal with
All
it.
right, Diana.
they're all flood estate and there are other
Right.
historical properties.
Yeah, so, but
Let's look at it. Is all I'm saying.
the direction here is to split the two, go forward with the Mills Act, and then we'll come back and deal with the artifacts and broaden it beyond what has been dealt with in the past.
There's a link to the list in the chat if anyone's interested in looking at it.
But why don't you put it in your Friday email?
I will do that as well. And there are other properties other than Lindenwood listed on that list.
Okay, great. Oh, so, okay. Okay, so we'll look at it and we'll see what makes sense.
So are we directing staff to take action to find a curator and to go through our list and update it?
I think we would bring that issue back in terms of priorities for the council to consider. Perhaps at our goals meeting, we have a lot of things on the planning
Thank you.
plate right
Thank you,
now with the
City
housing
Manager.
element.
Appreciate that very much.
And because this is a public hearing, we should open the public hearing and see if there's any public comments as well.
Right, thank you. Yes, is there any public comment on this item 14 or 13?
13.
I don't see any public comment. So I will close the public hearing and we'll readdress the Mills Act ordinance proposal at the next meeting. The next item is item 14, which is, I believe, a public hearing also. It's introduction of an ordinance repealing chapter 8.56 of the Atherton Municipal Code and adopting a new chapter 8.56 regulating disposable food serviceware by food facilities to align with new state laws.
Thank you, Mr.
So I'm
Mayor.
opening the public hearing.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of the council. Since adoption of our ordinance, state laws further evolved. And then on February 8th of 2022, the County Board of Supervisors adopted an ordinance incorporating the new state's amendments. And then through our MOU, since we use them, we've kind of got to mirror that process. So that's what this ordinance does, is it mirrors what's going on at the state level so that the county can continue to enforce in a uniform way the disposable food serviceware requirements. Our sustainability coordinator, Douglas Kim, is also on the line this evening. And he's welcome to add anything in addition to that very brief report that I gave or answer any questions the council may have.
Thank you, George. I just wanted to add that these are pretty routine amendments to the ordinance to keep us in sync with state law, and that we have here at the meeting Yunsu Lim from the county's Office of Sustainability, if you have any questions.
Okay. Are there any questions? Okay, I don't see any questions. Diana?
In that document, it said something about a March 22nd date and whether we were going to comply to move to match the October date. Who determines whether they're going to allow so our whole group has a March. Can you explain that a little bit better? It wasn't clear. Who determines that?
Sure, if I could. The county has pushed back the enforcement date for Atherton to October 1st. And so we have time before the county begins to enforce this ordinance.
Great. So that happened. It was talking. All right. That's great. Thanks for clarifying.
Okay, any other questions? Let me see if there's any public comment on this public hearing regarding this ordinance change. I don't see any public comment.
Motion to approve.
Motion to
Second.
approve and a second.
So we're actually motioning to introduce the first reading of this.
Without reading, yeah, without reading.
Okay, so we have a motion to approve the first reading of the proposed ordinance replacement and a second. If we could do a roll call, that'd be great.
Councilmember Polito,
Aye.
Hawkins,
Yes.
Lewis,
Yes.
Vice Mayor Whitmer,
Yeah.
and Mayor DeGolia.
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, so we're now closing the public hearing and we're moving on to item number 15, which is certification of the continuing emergency. And we're able to make different findings under the rules and regulations associated with that emergency.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of the council. Typically, this is on your consent agenda. It was pulled from consent tonight and put on the regular agenda for a reason that I'll get to in a moment. But staff recommends continuation of the certification of continuing emergency until the state lifts its emergency declaration, even though it feels we're maskless and walking around and gathering and all that sort of stuff. The state still does recommend measures that promote social distancing, such as continuation of Zoom meetings or hybrid meetings and things like that. And the town has considered that as part of our local emergency plan and remains under that same state declaration of emergency. And in addition to all of that, one of the other reasons to continue the certification of emergency consistent with the state is so that if there is any second or third round of funding that comes from the state, we want to make sure that we are in line for that as well. So if we haven't got an emergency declaration, there's a question of whether we're actually able to recover that. But the reason it's on the agenda this evening is we were supposed to be meeting in hybrid tonight. And Councilmember Lewis actually walked into the council chambers today when we were testing the technology. And it works great, but we weren't quite sure if it was going to work. And the training kept getting pushed and pushed until we actually just did it today. So it does work. Anthony participated in a number of test Zoom meetings, and so it's going to be really great. But it's not for tonight. And so our first hybrid meeting, we're hoping for April 6th. For those that can make it in the room. And the question for me that I'm seeking feedback from the council on is, as the council moves to hybrid meetings, so can the planning commission and other committees that the town has, like Park and Rec or Bike Ped, et cetera. So if the council's meeting in hybrid, do you want to require that those committees and the commission also meet in hybrid? Or do you want to allow them the option to meet in full Zoom non-hybrid as long as the emergency continues? That's the basic reason I have it off consent.
Okay. Any questions? I don't see any questions from anyone on the council. I have a question, George. In connection with the issue that you've raised, which is how do we want this to impact the planning commission and the various committees that are advisory committees to the council. Do we have the option going forward to choose the council and I suppose committees and commissions to meet in person and allow hybrid attendance by the public over Zoom while we're meeting in person, or I'm just trying to understand what the different scenarios are. Or do we have the option of some of us meeting in person and some of us being on Zoom, and the same being true for the public?
It's the latter. If we're meeting in hybrid, the public and or members of the council or committee can be either in person or via Zoom. And the Brown Act, as it's currently sitting, so long as the state of emergency continues, actually allows you to be outside of the jurisdiction, doesn't require a quorum in the room, and a number of other features that we've kind of gotten used to over the last couple of years. Once that all goes away, you're going to be required to have a quorum of any commission or body in the room. And if you are via teleconference, you're probably going to have to be in a location where you can publicly post the agenda. That will need to be listed on the agenda again, much like it was prior to COVID. So we can do the latter that you mentioned if you want to, as a policy call, push that down into the commission and the committees.
Okay. Any questions? I don't see any questions. Is there any public comment on this matter?
I don't see any,
Okay.
Mayor.
Let's take comments.
What's that bell? It keeps ringing.
Right. I keep hearing a beep, beep, beep.
I think it's a bell on one of these two cats that we see.
Uh-oh.
That's true.
Stopped.
I don't-
It stopped magically. Okay.
Could have been the train.
I don't think so.
No, it was like a little squeaky sound. I thought it was someone's chair.
It's a bell. It's a little bell.
Better.
Well,
There it is again.
Yeah, yeah.
yeah, I think it's my wife's thing somewhere. I can barely hear it, but I have to go look for it.
Okay.
We're just going to have to mute you, Mayor.
Sorry, I know, but I want to make a comment on this issue. I think we should allow hybrid meetings for as long as possible. I mean, I think they're great for the public. We get more public participation because of the hybrid meetings, and they're incredibly inconvenient for not just us, but for staff. If we are meeting in person, then of course staff have to be there. So one thing I've considered is for committees, if the committee is going to meet in person, even if some people are on the phone or on Zoom, staff has to be there. So that's a consideration. I love the idea of meeting hybrid as long as we can. Diana.
I have a question about what George was saying about, do we require the committees to not be on Zoom, or are they allowed to continue on Zoom? Do they not just have to have the same rules of whatever we have?
Right, and that's kind of what I'm asking. So if the council's saying we're going to meet in hybrid, which means some on Zoom, some in person, and that's what we're going to do, we're going to use the new council chambers for that. Do you want to allow your committee and the commission, your committees and the commission, to say, we're not going to meet in hybrid, we're only going to meet in Zoom so long as this emergency continues?
But in that scenario, they're not going to have access to hybrid capabilities unless they're going in our conference room. So are we going to allow all of our committee meetings to take place in our council room or require it?
They did before the pandemic, all of them met in the council chambers except for the Park and Rec Committee.
Okay, well, I would be in favor of offering that as an option, but if they want to do it on Zoom, we should let them do it on Zoom until the emergencies, until they can't.
Okay, Mona.
I was just going to say 3 legal points. One, the legislature has determined that there's been significant value in having these hybrid meetings, and there's pending legislation to continue to allow meeting indefinitely. So that's something that might happen. 2, there's nothing that legally requires us to allow a hybrid option for the council, any of our committees, the commission. That's an option that we have. However, if adopting an AB 361 resolution, which says that there are still concerns, we want to make sure that, you know, folks are social distancing, or there might be another outbreak, or whatever the case might be. If there's going to be different rules applicable to the commission or committees, we have to articulate why we're going to treat them differently. Why would they have to show up in person, whereas the council can meet you know, the hybrid? And there's valid findings. Sometimes it could be because there's more people that show up for council meetings. And so we want to regulate the number of people. You know, there's all kinds of things that we can do, but I just wanted you to be aware of that.
Okay, Bill.
Yeah, I'm in favor of hybrid for everyone. I think that one of the problems with some of the committees is that somebody's out of town, but if they can dial in or Zoom in, you know, the meetings can meet, as opposed to causing, you know, a delay. I would like to say, though, I've heard a lot of comments from people who've gone to the planning commission about, I guess, one commissioner, and I don't know if it's been corrected by now or not, but never turns on the camera. And they would like to see, you know, when you're presenting, you can see whether or not they're listening and whether or not they're paying attention, and you read them to see whether or not, you know, I think it's important that they have their camera on.
I agree.
So I think we should require that. And if they're not comfortable in doing that, then I think that they should, you know, I mean, they may have some sort of problem and they can't do it this week, but, you know, on a whole, they should have to have the camera on. But I'm 100% in favor of a hybrid for the time being, so that we don't have, you know, not meeting quorums for the meetings.
Well, is that something we can do? Require them to turn on the cameras?
We can make that a part of Zoom, but if there is a technology issue that prevents them from doing so, low bandwidth wherever they're at, that sort of thing, they'll have a challenge with cameras.
So I think we need to qualify it that if they're capable of turning on their cameras, that they do so. If we can do that, I think
it wouldn't be part of this
everybody would agree with
resolution or anything, but it would be part of our policy for Zoom operation of committees or commissions.
Okay.
I think it's important that we let the committee decide, because for Zoom versus hybrid, because, for example, I know that Park and Rec really want to meet in person, because there's a whole number of people on that committee that they've never met in person, anyone else on the committee. And they want, and they spend a lot of time with each other at their meetings, and they want to meet one another. So they want the hybrid meeting rather than the only Zoom meeting. And so I think we should allow each committee to decide if they want to meet. But I think they should enable Zoom. So the Park and Rec, and I'll say this at the next meeting, I don't think that they should meet at the main house anymore. If they want to meet in person, they can meet in person, but they have to meet in the council chambers so that the public can attend by Zoom. I'll also say that a very significant issue that's come up in some county committees that I am on has been this rule that once there's no longer an emergency, if we go back to the old rule, then you have to post the agenda and allow anyone to come into the facility that you're in if they want to attend. And that is absolutely unsafe for women in particular. And I've heard it in spades and we're talking about people being in their houses, you know, in Atherton or Redwood City or Menlo Park or wherever they live, being in their houses and having to allow anyone to come into their house to attend the Zoom meeting that they're attending. That law should be changed. And I think it will be changed because I know that's been publicized as a result of all of the Zoom activity during the pandemic. Mona.
Exactly. The proposed bills that have been presented would allow the discontinuation, again, if we follow all of the other conditions, the requirement to invite someone into your home or hotel room or wherever you are participating. The other interesting condition in the draft proposed bill is a requirement for local officials, elected and appointed, to keep their camera on when they are in meetings. So that's another thing that's in the bill.
Great. Okay. And does that constitute sufficient direction, George?
On this issue, what I heard was you want to encourage hybrid meetings from the commission and the committees, but you do also want to give them the flexibility. But if they are going to do a hybrid meeting, they have to do it in the council chambers. Is that?
Yeah, they have the flexibility to choose to do 100% Zoom.
Is that the consensus? Okay. And then you would still need an action to adopt a resolution continuing the certification of emergency.
So moved.
Second.
Motion and a second.
And no public comment, is that right?
Correct. You're muted, Anthony.
Sorry, the motion was made by?
Elizabeth and seconded by Bill.
Thank you. Councilmember Polito.
Aye.
Member Hawkins,
Aye.
Lewis,
Aye.
Vice Mayor Widmer,
Yes.
and Mayor DeGolia.
Yes.
Thank you.
I think I'm actually in a hybrid meeting. I'm in my office, but I could hear Anthony through the wall, even though he was muted.
I was a tenor, so I tend to project.
Okay, we're moving on to item 16, which is approval of a professional services agreement with Garavaglia Architecture for the Atherton Rail Station remodel project.
Robert?
Sure. Thank you, Mayor, members of the council. The council authorized staff to release a request for proposals for remodeling of the Atherton rail station building. We received one proposal from Garavaglia Architecture for the remodel. Originally, the proposal was for approximately $125,000 just for the area, for the station building and the area around it. Staff worked with the architect to refine the scope of work, to reduce the cost of the design services down to approximately $94,000, as well as to provide for the additional option of landscaping screening along the rail corridor fence. And so we're recommending, Garavaglia Architecture has significant experience with historic structures, including several rail-related buildings. We think they're well qualified and are going to be able to provide us with the services that we need. And so we're asking you to approve a contract with Garavaglia for the design of the building, and at your option, if you would like to include the landscaping design along the fence with the rail corridor to provide some screening between the parking and the train, that's at your option. So if included, the total cost of the contract would be just over $107,000.
Okay. Any questions from anyone on the council? I don't see any. Diana.
What will the final product will be a buildable thing? Because we have $400,000 for this, and they're coming up with a design. Is it a buildable plan?
When you say a buildable plan, can you clarify? They will be providing a building permit set that would be approved by the building department. At this point, we don't know what the full cost of the work will be. And it may be very likely that the overall cost of the work will be beyond the $400,000 budget that we have through the grant.
So if that's, all right, so next question. We would still, will there still be more design work when they're done? Are they doing all the design work? And then the next vendor will be a contractor who's going to actually build it? Except for the exhibits, is that correct?
For the building work, yes, that is correct. So they will be preparing a full design and bid package for us to go out and solicit a contractor to do the work.
And it stops at the cases. And so the additional costs that we're going to have in the end will be actually designing the displays, but the cases are in this design.
They will be doing the space planning and layout for them. There'll be a lot of conversations with the subcommittee as to whether these are going to be, for example, off-the-shelf casework or specialty design. If it requires specialty design, it may be a little bit extra.
Bill.
Yeah, I got the impression that what Diana was asking, are they going to do construction drawings? And I didn't get that impression reading this and looking at the schedule. That was, they gave us a timetable for doing construction drawings, which are different than the conceptual drawings, but they weren't included. It said it, as needed or something like that. So I'm not so sure that your answer was, maybe I misunderstood when I read it, Robert, but I don't think that maybe.
I can point you to page 29 of 59.
Okay.
Where task 4 includes project design and permitting. And so they're going to develop the 90% set. We'll submit that for the building permit. And they will develop the final plan specifications and estimate for bidding.
Well, but to go to get planning and a permit, you don't have to have all the construction drawings that give all the detail of how everything is going to be put together by the construction company. And all the specifications for the structural parts of the, it's different. So if you think it's included, I'd like to see them actually come back and confirm that it's construction drawings as well.
Yeah, well, we have them not only for the construction drawings, but as well for bidding support and construction support. So we have them available through the duration of the, not just putting the plans and specifications together for permitting, but as well for bidding support if there's any contractor questions, and through the construction for RFIs, as well as for punch list and a couple of site visits to make sure things are going.
I mean, they're also talking about construction administration and, construction support. So they've got to have construction drawings to go forward with that. That's on pages 30 and 31. I mean, I think it seems very reasonable, and you reduced their fee, actually.
Not arguing with 107.
Well, the 13,000 for the landscape screening design is at the pleasure of the council.
Okay, Bill, do you still have your hand up?
Oh, sorry.
It's okay. Other questions?
What?
Bob?
Yeah, I don't think Bill's question's been answered to my satisfaction, and I had the same question. I can't find, or wasn't able to find, verbiage that says we're going to have construction-ready drawings.
Page 30 of 59.
I can point you to, if you'd like, page 30, in the middle of the page, permit submittal and review, 100% complete at end of permit submittal, includes additional information pertinent to the construction documents will be added to address the comments and create, as well as integrating any final client comments to create 100% documents to be used by the contractor for construction.
Okay, I read that. It's still, If you think that covers it, fine. I did read that.
Is the applicant here? Is he on the call?
No, we don't have the consultant on the line. But
In our parlance, this is pretty standard language.
Okay.
All right, just be clear when you issue the purchase order.
will do.
Okay. No other questions? Let me see if there's any public comment. I don't see any public comment. Maybe that's because John Malbit stepped away from his desk.
But he does have his camera on.
I do. I see that. So comments from the council, Bill and then Diana.
Yeah, when we did the Civic Center, we started with conceptual drawings, and then we got into actually having WNRS to start doing the design, and it went on and on and on and on and on. And one of my concerns at that time was that, but we don't have a budget right at the beginning. And again, we're going down the same path, unless we're setting $400,000, which I don't think that this number is reflective of, is reflective that the number is going to end up being $400,000. I think that we should be realistic with ourselves and say, how much money are we really planning on spending on this total project, and making sure that as we're doing the design, we understand, and the design architect knows what we're targeting, as opposed to having carte blanche like we did once before.
Okay, Diana.
I like that we pulled out the screening part of it. And I would propose that we grant them the 97 or whatever it was, taking out the screening, and have the screening be a separate project for phase 2. And my reasoning for that is that I am, like everyone's implying, I'm concerned that we're going to design this thing and not have enough money to build it. And so I would take the optional things like the screening and save that $13,000 toward building the actual thing, and then look at that as phase 2. So I would approve the 97 and then have the other one be phase 2 and have it be pulled out, and not grant at this moment the full 107 or whatever it is.
Okay. Other comments? Elizabeth? No comment? Okay. I mean, I think that Bill's comment about targeting a overall cost is well taken. I don't have any idea what the cost is going to be. And I don't think we should give them carte blanche for some amount that goes beyond our expectations. I mean, I think that if the cost were to go beyond what Caltrain has provided us for some limited amount, that would be acceptable to me, because I think it'd be really nice for the town to have a facility in the train station that, is a little train museum, and that we can be proud of, and fits into the Civic Center, so that it's completely turned away from the tracks and toward the Civic Center. I think that's a benefit to the town. And it wouldn't bother me to spend $100,000 more than we have from Caltrain, but I wouldn't want it to be an unlimited amount, because they could go crazy with that. And so that's my opinion. Bob, and then Bill.
My question was, I've got a question. Robert, have you discussed with this consultant the 400,000? Have any of these numbers been discussed with them?
Yeah, when we outlined the RFP, we made it clear how much money we had available in the grant. And so they were aware of the current budget of 400,000. but there is a base level of scope in terms of what we want to accomplish. And so we have built into our allowance the ability to have at least one additional alternate to help us get within the budget. And the concern that we raised with them in the initial conversation is if our budget is 400,000, we're obviously concerned about using that 125 just straight off on the design aspect. It didn't really leave much room for the construction budget, but the building is in deteriorated condition. And we do need to make sure that we are addressing the deferred maintenance on the building to get it into appropriate shape. And until the full assessment is done, we can't really tell what that number is going to be. As we move through the design process, the subcommittee is going to be involved in reviewing the conceptuals, as well as when we move forward with the design, and should be aware of where we are with regards to the estimate of what that construction number might be. I am going to caveat that with the fact that we have been experiencing a bit of inflation, not just regular. We've had COVID issues that have increased supply chain costs and various other things. And right now, as you all know, gas prices and everything else are escalating. And so what we could have built a couple of years ago for $400,000 versus what we're going to be able to build a year from now for $400,000 might be a bit different.
Yeah, I understand, but I agree with Rick. I mean, if we all look, if it takes a little bit more money and we get something that's worthwhile, that's fine. But I also agree with Bill that I don't want them coming back with some $750,000 beat up train station.
I'm going to say that that's not our intent. I mean, we're not, I mean, it's a historic, the building is historic to us, and we're going to want to preserve it in its current character. Where the desire is not to change the character of the building. So
right, and you've made it clear to them already, and there will be more back and forth during the whole process. So I would agree then with Diana's suggestion that we pull the landscaping out and award the contract for the 90, whatever it is.
Okay, Bill.
So first off, you know, I brought this thing up. So look, we want it to be right. And, you know, looking at things, you know, generally the design is about, you know, 15% of the cost. And so, you know, the number's already going to be over 400,000 if you use that earmark. Just like with the Civic Center, we said, we're just going to hydro seed. And then everybody said, no, it's not going to really look good. We won't be proud of it, which is true. And we really want it to be landscaped so it looks decent and it's, you know, it's right. So I do think we should do the landscape design. And I do think we should just internally say, we're going to have to take $100,000 out of our budget and put it towards this. But that is it. Okay. And if we underrun it, then that's great. But I just don't think we're going to get this thing done for another $300,000. And I think it's foolhardy to say we're not going to do the landscaping, because we're going to do the landscaping. I mean, that's what we're going to do. So that's my 2 cents, and I was the guy that brought it up, and I want to set a budget. I guess that was really where I was trying to go. Let's make a hard and fast what the budget is. If it's $500,000 period at the end, that should include landscaping, that should include the design, and that should give you some time to overrun some stuff and maybe put in some extra whiz bang things in, you know, as far as displays and stuff. But that should be it. We shouldn't plan on any more money. That's my 2 cents. And so, you know, I just do not believe it's going to be 500,000. I think we're fooling ourselves if we do that. So let's just face the elephant in the room and do it now, but hold to it. Thanks.
Okay, Diana.
I agree with part of what he said, is that we should have a budget, but still am holding to the fact that I'd like to pull that landscaping along the train tracks out. Because in the end, if we do go over budget, it'd behoove us to spend more of the over budget on the interior, because we're gonna have to hire another, so we'll have to hire two more vendors above this. One's the people to actually build it. And then the other one on top of that are the people that are gonna do the films and do the actual content that's inside it. And in the end, we don't really know how much the different phases cost right now, nor can we really. So I would like to propose that we keep the landscaping to phase 2 so that we can make that decision about how to spend our last money on whether we decide to spend more of it on the inside and less on the outside. We don't know that yet. So that's why I was inclined to separate those two for now until we see more of what comes out of it, and then decide where we'll spend that money and how much.
Okay, Bob.
Yeah, these aren't the guys that should be designing the landscape probably anyway. They're going to sub it out. We can address the landscaping. The Civic Center will be done. That landscaping will be done. We can do the design for less than what they're charging us and make sure it's done right. I say pull it out.
Okay, Elizabeth.
So I do have a question and a comment. It wasn't is this a proposer also proposing to do the construction? I thought this was just
No.
to do the design. Okay,
No.
so we will have an opportunity to take this out, the design out to bid to get an idea, because we have no idea how much it's going to cost to construct it. We can sit here and kind of fantasize about that, but we don't know. So I think we have to kind of take it in piecemeal. We don't have to make the decision right here, right now about what the ultimate cost is going to be. And I think that this is something that's very, very important to our town that we need to be very careful about doing, but we need to do it. And the people that I talked to about this concept, I was at a party on Sunday afternoon and there were lots of Atherton residents there. And they said, how's it going? I said, well, and the really exciting thing is that the historic train station is going to become a train museum. Isn't that great? What a good idea. This is, so people will love this. They will love it as it starts going. I agree with Diana. I agree with Bob that we should, not even consider the landscaping at this time. As you know, landscaping comes later, kind of at the end of the project. And so we're not going to be installing the landscaping within this, the scope of this work, which is the design and the construction drawings. So I think that we kind of take it piecemeal. We've got a $400,000 grant from Caltrain right now. That's kind of what in it. Maybe we can build it within that budget. Who knows? The cost overruns or the cost inflation, but just take it one step at a time. And I think what's before us is to approve the design. And from what I could see from this bidder, is they've done a lot of these type of things and really nice designs in and around our community.
Right, but my comment is, to Bill's credit, if you need to give some direction to the designer, because if they're looking at $400,000 or they're looking at $1 million, they're going to design something different.
No, I think we've given them some criteria, haven't we, Mr. Ovadia?
I think that's what we're saying. We haven't given them a direction around the dollar amount. We've told them there's this $400,000 we're getting from Caltrain.
No, I think, Robert, did you not I thought council gave some direction and parameters about what the design is supposed to entail.
Yeah.
I see city manager shaking his head. Yes, I see Robert does. Diana?
Yeah, what I wanted to say is that if we just step back for a minute, the thing is a set structure, as Robert was trying to say, and we're keeping the set structure with this minor revision. The actual, I think the design is not, this kind of a thing is going to follow a different rule of thumb than what was mentioned earlier. Because I think the design is going to cost more than a bigger percentage of what the building is. The building is not very big.
Right.
So they're just flipping. If you look at what they're actually doing physically, it doesn't seem like it's going to be as much as we're anticipating. But I could be totally wrong on that. But I do think we should have criteria. I don't think they can go too wild with it. The most it's because it's so small and they're just building cases. So the bigger expenses on top of this is going to be the videos and the art part of it.
So the problem is that this structure has a lot of deferred maintenance. There's termites, there's wood rot and stuff. And I thought we had a subcommittee that is going to be working with the designer to kind of keep the parameters around them. And so it's really up to you and Rick to do that, unless you want a bigger committee like the Civic Center Advisory Committee. But I think that you have the ability to keep the wheels on and keep it within range. But there are things that need to be done in there.
Absolutely.
Okay, so we need a motion.
I'll make the motion to approve this design proposal.
For the $97,000.
Without the landscaping.
Without the landscaping, the reduced amount, the 97,000. And I'll add to that the ad hoc subcommittee work closely with the designer to keep the boundaries so that it doesn't go wild.
Okay.
Agreed.
Okay.
Second.
Great. Okay.
All in favor?
You're muted, Anthony.
Thank you, sir. Councilmember Polito,
Aye.
Hawkins,
Aye.
Lewis,
Aye.
Vice Mayor Widmer,
Okay.
and Mayor DeGolia.
Aye. Okay, we're now moving on to item number 17, which is the housing element update strategies.
Good evening. We are back to talk again about the housing update strategies. Planning Commission and City Council had a joint study session back in April, and then the council further refined the strategies at both your January 12th and February 24th meetings. As you recall, here's our RENA obligation for the next planning cycle, which covers an 8-year period. And I thought I would just start by talking about what assumptions went into the numbers that are provided in the staff memo based on direction from the last City Council meeting. So the production we have outlined is based on feedback from the City Council, and in some areas it's somewhat optimistic. Specifically, the council recommended that we increase the ADU production to 35 per year, and this is higher than our recent production experience. HCD typically relies on a 5-year production data, and we will need to explain why we feel the higher number will be achieved. So we will need to provide some information in the housing element to justify this projection. The next item is the lot splits, and since your last meeting, we've received under SB 9 2 applications, and we've spoken with 3 interested parties. And so I feel comfortable of increasing the number of sites that we anticipate, number of net new housing units we anticipate to be receiving through lot splits under SB 9. So those are a combination of a new main dwelling unit and a smaller SB 9 unit that's very similar to an ADU. We could shift the income category for these SB 9 units based on what we're seeing, to put some in the low or the moderate income category, similar to what we're doing for the ADUs. But as you see with the totals, we have a bit of a shortfall in the above moderate category. So we could also just leave it as is in this projection. So let's see, the next item would be the number of vacant sites that we anticipate to be developed. HCD does require that even on vacant sites that we show additional justification as to why they will develop during this cycle. One thing that's helpful is to have a letter from the interested property owner or a letter from a developer indicating that they're interested in developing that site. So this category may be a little more difficult to support and to receive HCD approval on without further evidence, especially since we have not seen single-family home net new production in the past few years. We're pretty close now to kind of a neutral status, whereas before we were losing homes. So
But I have a question on that, Lisa. You said you're focusing on the net number of sites. And my understanding from talking to George is that if there's a site where a house is taken away because a property owner buys the property next to them and takes and clears the house, that we don't have to report that, that we only, that so it's not a net issue, it's only vacant lots that get a new property built on them. That's
right.
relevant.
So what I'm saying, the net new is we can't count where there's a property with a house, they demo the house, they build a new house. So I'm looking at opportunities on vacant sites where there's no house to create new housing units. Yes.
Yeah, so that's good, but don't we have a history of new houses being built on vacant lots over the last 10 years?
Very few.
Okay, but over 10 years is very few.
Yeah, so it's just difficult when you take a look at the number of houses we're also losing.
But that's my point. It doesn't sound, unless the conversation with George was inaccurate, it doesn't sound like we need to consider the ones we're losing. We only need to consider if people are building on vacant lots, not if people are taking down houses.
Yeah, I can confirm that, but also we see more construction where there's a house removed and then a new house built, so kind of a replacement housing.
Sure, well, we see that a lot.
Right, we haven't seen as many, right, where there's built on a vacant lot because we just don't have that much of an inventory. So we just may need to justify this a bit more, showing that there is development interest in building on these lots.
Okay, do we have the information on how many vacant lots have been built on in the last several years?
We can gather that information. Yes.
Okay.
And then the next item I think we talked about was the town-owned property, and that would be assuming, that was brought up at the last meeting, assuming the corporation yard would be relocated and then we can construct units on the town-owned property. The other item would be with the school facilities and sites. So we could have a new policy or program in the housing element that supports schools building housing on nearby properties and that the town would consider kind of rezoning to accommodate that. And I do think Menlo School is genuinely interested in doing something like that, and they do have the resources. Menlo College is interested in building housing on their campus. However, they've indicated to us that they just don't have the financial resources and are not sure they're going to be able to get there in the next 8 years. So there is some concern with this school facility number as well, especially since we've relied on it in past housing elements and we haven't seen production. And then the final item I just wanted to mention is I did outreach and speak with the other jurisdictions to see what they're doing. So I spoke with Woodside, Portola Valley, and Hillsborough, and I just wanted to briefly report out what I heard from their staff. Woodside has a committee, and committee members are reaching out to property owners to find sites that would likely develop with multifamily housing. They're looking to do that throughout the town. So they're looking at more of a scattered throughout the town approach. Portola Valley is quite concerned about some of the hazards in that area. They have an earthquake fault zone and they have high fire severity zones. So they're looking to rezone at least one property, and they're doing that at a minimum of 20 units an acre. Hillsborough is looking at rezoning its town center site to build housing, likely at 10 units an acre, and additionally rezoning some properties along El Camino. And so these jurisdictions are also considering rezoning to allow as well multifamily only. So it would consider single family as a non-conforming use. And I believe Hillsborough is also looking at multiple ADUs on one lot. So I can maybe now start walking through the different maps and the different areas that council provided based on the.
Before you go on, on schools and facilities overlay, we did talk about including the public schools. Did you reach out to the public schools?
I haven't had a chance to do that yet, but we will be doing that, yes.
Okay.
Yes. Thank you. Okay, so we'll move forward. So at your last meeting, you requested some revisions to the map and the council was kind enough to do its homework. And so I have those maps that were outlined in the staff report. So council members provided feedback to the city manager and we paired the map based on those top choices from council members. And I'm going to walk through each of the map areas. So this first area is at Oakwood and it includes a total of 8 lots in that location. They range in size from 1.5 acres to 0.33 acres in size. If all of the lots were developed at the maximum 10 unit an acre, you would see 50 housing units. Realistically, we would anticipate probably in the next 8 years, 1 lot developing, and that at 10 units an acre could result in 14 net new housing units. Do you want to talk about each area or go through all of them and then discuss it at the end?
Why don't you take questions on each area, on each maps, because you're going to talk about them as maps, right?
Yeah, separate map areas, yes. But I can walk through them rather quickly.
Okay, if you want to go through them, go ahead.
Okay. And then the next area is on Bay Road. There's 5 lots. Each lot is just under an acre in area. If all of them were to develop, you have a capacity of about 46 housing units. We would anticipate possibly 1 lot developing over the next 8-year cycle for 8 net new housing units. This is the area at El Camino and Victoria Drive, right at Valparaiso. So there's 10 lots, but they're very small. Each lot's about 0.32 acres in area. And so that would be 3 units per lot. And if all of them were to develop, you've got 30 housing units, but there's kind of some fiscal analysis that would need to be done to show that it's viable to develop 3 lots. So staff feels that this is more unlikely due to the small lot sizes of each property. And then this area is along El Camino, the west side of El Camino from, I believe that's Almond Draw North. And then we've got a total of 19 lots. A few of them are larger of half an acre, and then many are in that 0.32 acre area. As well, we kind of look at this area as unlikely to develop given the small lot size. The next area would be Almond Draw south to Tuscaloosa along the west side of El Camino, 9 lots, ranging in size from just over half an acre to 0.19 acres in area. And again, given the small lot size, it feels unlikely that those would develop as multifamily housing. This is the east side of El Camino, Lloyd and Park Lane, 9 lots. They're also rather small in area, about 0.3 acres each. You could have a capacity of 20 housing units total if they all developed, but given the small size, it seems unlikely. And then these are 5 lots on Marsh, and there are some larger ones here. So we've got from an acre to just over half an acre. If all of them were developed, you could have 32 housing units. But I do see the potential for at least one of those lots developing, and we could estimate 4 net new housing units at that location. There was 2 other sites that were provided after the packet was published. So one is at Alameda and Polhemus, and this is a very large property at 5.3 acres. So this does feel like it would have some good potential to develop given the large lot size. And then the next comment was Santiago and Valparaiso, and I'm not sure exactly which property was being referenced, so we can come back to that map area. And then this is all of kind of the areas shown on one map. And as indicated, it feels likely that you would see development on map area 1, map area 2, which is over on Bay Road, and map area 3, which is on Marsh Road. And so staff would recommend supporting those as potential sites, generating a total of 26 units in the next planning cycle. And we already went through this, so I'd be happy to walk through any of these map areas and discuss the sites. And I know we also have a member of the public this evening that would like to address the council. Thank you.
Okay, questions from members of the council? I don't see any questions. Okay, is there any public comment? Mr. Arata.
I think I am muted.
You have.
Yes, I have some comments. I think Lisa talked about Oakwood, and that's where 23 Oakwood is, and that's the project that I'm working with. I came up with 16 units at 10 units an acre. The plans that I have given to Lisa about a year ago was for 26 units. And with 26 units, the idea was to sell these to school teachers or people who work for the town. And these condos were from 985 square feet for a one bedroom to I think almost 1,200 for a two bedroom. At those 26 units, at the current market is about $1,000 a square foot. So these would be, the one bedrooms would be just a little under $1 million, and the other ones would be a little more. And I think I can offer those for maybe 20% less. I'm based on what costs are now. If we had to do it on 10 units, it changes the whole thing around. I mean, at 10 units per acre. And then they would have to be luxury condos. So, but the property right now is for sale. My mother passed away a couple of years ago, and basically there's a caretaker in the house now. But that can be done pretty quickly. And after watching this for the last 3 or 4 meetings, in my mind is why can't you just do this on a one lot per lot basis? And here's something that's almost ready to go, and it'll get you 26 units. And if you don't want to do 26 units, it'll get you 16. So that's my comment.
Okay, thank you. Is there any other public comment? And if anyone has a question for Mr. Arata, you please feel free to ask it. He's here and available.
With the noted exception, you shouldn't talk about a pending application that might be coming before the council.
Very good. So we're just talking about the general issue of an overlay, in this case on a property on Oakwood, but we're not talking about any particular application. Okay, Diana, and then Bill.
To clarify what I thought I heard you say, are you suggesting that instead of is laxing the density so that if we have a space that could do more per acre, that's the way to go? Is that what you're suggesting? Or you also said do it on a case-by-case basis. So that's also a good idea of case-by-case, that we could make an allowance for something if it worked. But were you saying more density than 10?
Well, okay. Yes, because this lot, and I don't know if you ever looked at it, but the lot is like 150 by 500, and it's 500 feet, 500 feet deep. And so because it's so deep and so narrow, we could put these things on a line. And as far as the density is, we came up with 26 because there's a grove of redwood trees in the middle that wanted to kind of like leave that as a park. So we could do more density if that's what you wanted, but that's not what I understood, is that we made the front unit look like an Atherton house, and then all the rest of the units go down the side for 500 feet. So if you looked at the plans, you can see that the 26 units is kind of, it's not too crowded.
Okay, Bob. Oh,
Yeah,
then Bill.
I think somehow I really don't remember exactly how we got to this cap of 10 per acre. But I think Mr. Arata's comment that hard fixed line for any piece of property that's developed in the town might be unnecessarily restrictive.
Okay, great. Bill.
Yeah, I thought that when we looked at this a while ago, it was, you know, we set 10 per acre per an acre, but, you know, some acres are larger, such as the one that is right on the corner of Polhemus, where it's, so you're not going to put 10 units on a 5-acre lot. You're going to put 10, and as you pointed out, it's going to be 20. So, you know, I think it has to be done properly. I think that you know, 10 per acre might, or 10 per one piece of property might be a tad bit restrictive, especially when that acre, the specific acre that came up, in this case is substantially larger. Either it's 5 acres or it's, you know, almost 2 acres. So anyway, that's my comment.
Okay, I've got a comment. Oh, go ahead, George.
Just a note about, and perhaps Lisa can talk a little bit about density bonus opportunities. If you want to set your standard at 10 units per acre, but allow a higher development level if there's a commitment to make those units low or very low units.
And that's in place regardless. So if somebody were to propose, say, 10 units on an acre lot, and then they were to provide some of those at lower income, we by default have to provide the density per state density bonus law. We've also retained a consultant to do a fiscal analysis because we would like to partner this upzoning as it is with an inclusionary requirement that would actually require them to provide some level of affordable units on site, and they would then be able to get that density bonus as well. And I just want to clarify for the density we're talking about, it's 10 units per acre, so it's a ratio. So if you have half an acre, you would get 5 units. If you have an acre and a half, which I believe the Oakwood property is 1.52 acres, then you would get 15 units on that property. And what Mr. Arata is talking about is a development proposal that's higher than that density that we've been discussing. It's closer, I think, to 18 units an acre. So the 20 units that staff had previously suggested, that proposal by Mr. Arata would fit better into that category. But George is right. You could also try to get there with the density bonus.
Well, couldn't they come for a variance to the planning commission? Okay.
Did you want to make a comment, Mr. Arata?
Yeah, I don't think we've actually made a application, so I just wanted to clarify that. And also, Lisa, my plan shows it as 1.62, not 1.52. So it would be another unit at 10, so it would be 16 instead of 15. But once again, I don't know what is considered low, medium, moderate, because we're dealing not in rents, we're dealing in total dollars that they would sell for. So once again, they would be lower at 26 units, then the price would have to go higher in order to cover the whole lot, the whole dollar amount. It would be higher to put 10 on, the price would go up. So I don't know if that would go into moderate or low or whatever, because I have no idea what those numbers are.
Diana, you're muted. You're muted.
sorry, I had that same question. How do we determine low income housing in Atherton? Is it based on what our going rates are per foot, or how do we determine that? What are there rules for that?
Yeah, state level rules.
It's based on area median income, and I was trying to cut and paste that table so I can put it in the chat. I think I got it. And so there's the different income categories. It's based on household size. A 1-bedroom unit, you could put a 2-person household in there. So we can just look at, let's see. Oh, George, you're amazing. There's the different income categories, and that shows you the income for the different individuals, and it's based on family size appropriate for the unit. So like I said, a 1-bedroom unit could have a 2-person household, 2-bedroom unit could have a 3-person household. And then the way you determine what the rent is it's typically based on 30% of their income. And then the purchase price, again, is going to be based on 30% of their income, but you also need to take into consideration if there's any homeowners association dues, any property tax, and then allowance for, I believe, insurance as well. And so there's a calculation that would need to be run to determine what the purchase price could be. We can have somebody help us do that. Thank you, George, for pulling that up.
Sorry, I still don't understand it. So are you basing it on how much the place is going to be rented for? This is all based on the person who moves in.
Correct. So if it's rented, there's a maximum rental amount and there's a maximum income the person can make. And that needs to be certified on an annual basis. So whoever lives in the unit would need to certify what their income is, and they need to report that to the town on an annual basis if it's a rental unit. If it's an ownership unit, it needs to be certified at the time of purchase that the person qualifies in this different income category. The price is set, and then they could live in there as long as they choose. Affordable rental units are limited to, Mona, is 45 or 55 years max, and I'm forgetting which is which on the owner and the rental, but one you can put a 55-year deed restriction on, the other's a 45-year deed restriction, and I can get back which is which. So if anyone were to sell an affordable unit within, say, that 55 years, it would need to be to another qualifying person that fits the income category. So if it's low income, it would need to be another low income person, and the calculation of price would be determined based on the income.
So it's based on the county income, not our city's income.
It's based on San Mateo County area median income, yes, which is much higher than anywhere else.
Yeah, well,
not based on Atherton.
Yeah, well, our income would be higher so than what San Mateo County is. So that makes it very unrealistic for us to come up with low income housing.
Well,
if it's based on our community.
If it's for a teacher, they're not, they're making $117,000, two people in the family. That's based on that table, then they would qualify as low.
But it's backwards. It's backwards. It's got to be, if someone's going to build a unit, it's got to be based on how much it costs to build it and how much you can rent it for, not
Diana.
Yeah, so that's why we would have this fiscal analysis to say, okay, if you have an Atherton acre, and let's just say it sold for $5 million, what is the cost to build these 10 units? What is the anticipated sales price? What profit does that developer make? And how many units can we then restrict to affordable income categories? So there is going to be some benefit to the developer that the town would want to realize through deed restricted affordable units. And we've asked a consultant to do that fiscal analysis for us.
But that's why affordable housing projects in a community like Atherton are very hard to make pencil.
Right.
They are typically highly subsidized in any other community. They're very expensive.
So in this case, does it end up being subsidized by the other units? So if you make 10 units and you set aside 2, they're earmarking that are going to be low income units and they qualify based on this statistics, the other units in that complex are going to have to raise their prices in order to compensate for the ones that are low. Is that how it works?
typically?
If anybody's asking me that question, I'm not a developer. I have no idea. And I still don't know how much they would sell, how much, what is the amount that you could sell? Like $1 million? Is that affordable for a teacher at 117,000? Maybe they have a down payment of $400,000 that their parents gave them or something. I don't know. But the thing is that if you want to get teachers in there and you want to get low income in there, if possible, and I don't know if that's even possible, but if you take 26 units and you only put half of those in there, then that price is almost going to double. So is it going to work for anybody?
So I'm going to come back to giving a comment on the overall housing production. And I don't want us to focus on a single property, although I do believe that there is a property on Oakwood that we should allow the overlay for. And when I look at the numbers, I think we can take out the town-owned property. I think we can take out the overlay maps for everything except on Oakwood, because we end up with enough properties. If there were 16 properties on the units that were going to be built, and we can demonstrate that would be a minimum, that's going to give us 405 properties when we're required to have 348. So that's 20% more than we require. I'm very comfortable with that.
Can you bring up the chart so we see what you're talking about? Can someone bring up the chart?
He's only talking about Oakwood right now, nothing else.
Yeah, no, I'm talking about taking off the town-owned properties and the rest of the overlay.
Yeah.
So put the list up so we know all the choices. If you're going to start taking stuff off the list, let's put the list up.
Everything's off the list, but Oakwood.
Yeah, it's really simple, Diana.
Okay, so I would make one other suggestion. We've just had a discussion about very low and low. And frankly, I think the only way we're really going to qualify for very low and low is through
ADUs.
Additional units like ADUs, where people make them available to their family members,
yeah,
or their service employees, or maybe a teacher or police officer.
Or a student.
But for the most part, I think it's going to be family and service employees. And I think those are good prospects. I like what you've done here, Lisa. I agree with your numbers for the ADUs. I think on the schools, that if the school were to develop the sites, as you've said, and I understand there's some risk in that because of the history, but if the school were to develop sites, I think your numbers should be flipped, and I think there'd be 10 very low, 10 low, 10 moderate, and 4 above moderate.
Can someone put the screen on the numbers that you're talking about, Rick? Because it's hard to follow you saying numbers.
Do you have the staff report in front of you?
It's page 3 of 14.
Page 3 of 14.
Why don't we put it on? Thank you. Now we can all see what we're talking about at the same time. Thanks.
So we could have seen it in our pack.
I'm talking about taking off the town-owned property line. I'm talking about changing the townhouse overlay to just deal with the one property on Arata, which Lisa can put in the number she wants. I think it would be a minimum of 16. And I'm saying, in my opinion, on the school and facility sites, the numbers could be reversed with, instead of there being 10 above moderate, there being 4 above moderate, and move that number to very low, because I think that if they build those facilities, they're going to make them available to their staff. And that's going to qualify more at the very low side than the above moderate side. That's my comment. And that helps us out.
Yep. I agree with the mayor. I think he's got it nailed. Absolutely.
So are you saying that you want to eliminate all the overlay maps we talked about?
Except
We
for
have one
23
property on Oakwood,
Oakwood.
and that would be a number that would be, I don't know, 16 or 20, whatever Lisa thinks is right. And I've got hands from Lisa and Bob. Lisa, do you have a comment?
I just wanted to let the council know that there is a new requirement. I think we've talked about it previously, but we need to make sure that we show our homework to HCD as well. They want to see how we are affirmatively furthering fair housing. So some of the concerns is that we need to address combating discrimination, overcoming patterns of segregation, and foster an inclusive community. So I just want the council to understand that the units need to be available to the general public. They need to show that they're available at different income categories and to a more diverse population than Atherton has typically shown. And so part of the problem with the ADUs from HCD's perspective is they're not always rented. They're often just left vacant. What I'd like to do is include a program where we work with an organization like HIP Housing to encourage those units to be rented and to have HIP be that arm to kind of help with the rentals. They do a home sharing program now that's very successful. So we're going to need to promote renting them a little bit more and showing that to HCD, but I just want to let the council know other jurisdictions that have relied entirely on ADU production have not received support from HCD, and they've wanted to see more multifamily in that community at higher densities like 28 an acre to make sure that they're affordable and they can accommodate a diverse population. So I just wanted to let you know that.
I love that.
Also, there's the housing endowment for, the Heart organization that help to help families, low and moderate income families, buy into condos and homes in the area. And so so we can, look to them to help with, say, the purchase of one of the lot splits or one of the condos that Mr. Arata is trying to build. And I would kind of recommend that we take another look at his project, and maybe because of the location of it, and it is on the perimeter of Atherton, that maybe higher density than the 10 per acre could be approved if, and because of the configuration of the lot may lend itself. And so that would help with the maybe moderate and then income diversity.
I'm in full agreement with that. I'd love to vote on it. So move on.
Yeah, what I was somewhat surprised to find out that in our housing element, whatever you call this whole deal, that ends this year, that we're going to make our forecast, I've been told, in all categories, including very low and low. Is that correct?
We're trying to
in the current housing element cycle, yes, it's a much lower category, correct?
Right. So the council should be aware of that the fact that it's not impossible to do this. It has happened, and the mechanisms are in place. They've worked so far in this housing element. So that's number one. Number two, I'm a little concerned, Rick, about throwing out the entire overlay other than one property, unless we're all in agreement that we're not going to restrict it to the 10 per acre, because you're not going to get to the 26 that's on the chart.
We don't need 26.
Well, that was on the chart.
Right.
And the other thing that I discussed with George is, after, I don't know how many of you looked at some of those letters to the Southern California entities, but they're brutal.
They're brutal.
And so I think a little, I realize it's a pain in the neck, but some level of overkill is probably going to help us in getting the necessary approval. So in other words, if we definitely don't want to be at 300, anywhere near 348. And I don't know whether 436 is enough overkill or not, but we might want to consider at least one other site on that overlay map. And, you know, every one of them is going to get contested by the populace, but we got to make tough decisions.
I have a question.
Go ahead.
So are we behind the power curve in creating any kind of outreach to our neighborhoods, you know, and people to ask them for their input on how we can, you know, ideas of where we might be able to find a large piece of property to build a nice community? One of the things that I approached to this, and Councilmember Hawkins Manwali and I, was that we looked at areas where it was kind of separated from a neighborhood community, if you would, you know, kind of on a peripheral artery where it faced a busy street, and it wasn't kind of in the main town element of community, you know, inside town, so that it was more on a main artery. And I think that, I don't know what kind of reality it might be to think about the 5 acres on you know, that, you know, that would be a great opportunity, but you know, how realistic that would be. So we would just have to figure that out. But it certainly would be appropriate because it's not within kind of a neighborhood grouping of, you know, other residences.
Okay, Diana.
Am I muted here?
No, you're okay.
Yeah. I want to pick up a little bit on what Bob was saying, and that I think there is a lot of, I think it would be really bad for us to go into this underestimating or under offering, and then having us get in the press and be made a, you know, we had communities around us already bring attention to our area. So in my view, I think we should go with a little bit over what you're saying right here and look at some of those overlays. And I would say, and I know we're going to take heat from the residents, but we have to convince these people that we're doing our share and that we're actually living up to it, because we don't want to be in the press and have it, that would be really bad for us. And I think that just because you rezone some of these properties, and these numbers that we have down here are all pretend numbers, we're just making this up in reality. We don't know that people will actually do this. So if you rezone something, we don't know that, we're just speculating that maybe one of those will build. Just because you rezone doesn't mean people will build. And for example, the ones on Marsh Road that were put on the overlay, two of those houses are brand new. Those are not, and those are the ones that were called out by number. Two of those looked pretty brand new. I don't think they're going to be developed. So there's a reality to this, and there's what we need to do. I don't know what I'm saying. I'm saying that we need to go, I agree with going over the number a little bit. And I don't agree with just throwing out the overlays that we talked about just because we're afraid we're going to get a bad reaction. That's the reality of the situation we're in.
Well, okay. I mean, I've proposed we throw out the overlays, not because we think we'd have a bad reaction, although I do think we would, but because I don't think it's right for Atherton. I don't support taking the Polhemus property and putting 50 units on that. That totally changes Atherton. It's in the middle of single family residences. There's no multifamily anywhere close to that. It totally changes Atherton. I'm 100% opposed to it. The idea of putting multi-family units into Victoria Manor along Victoria Drive just because they back up to El Camino is, there's absolutely no way I'm gonna vote for that. I'm 100% opposed to it. That neighborhood, yes, it's gonna go crazy, but it's gonna go crazy because the city council would be suggesting something that would destroy a neighborhood. And I won't support it.
But Rick, all right, can I rebut a couple of things you said? In that Victoria Manor neighborhood, the property that's literally on the corner of Valparaiso and El Camino, on across the street is a hotel, and on El Camino, and across the street on the right is that Compass Real, is a commercial. So that thing is literally a budding commercial development, and it's very dense. So at least that one unit right there has nothing in, and it's right there. It's already there. So
I think so, Diana, what they're saying is all those lots are really small and it would not work for that reason. And I can understand that. So, but
that I can understand as well.
I have a question. We didn't talk about the Marsh Road and the Marsh Road, not Marsh Road, sorry, Bay Road and Ringwood.
Right.
Those I can see that because they face Bay Road.
Right.
They're not part of the community of Lindenwood because they back up to that.
And Marsh Road is a slam dunk too.
Yeah, Marsh Road. Well, I think Diana had a really good point. Maybe a couple of those. I don't think all of that should be because that one house.
Yeah,
No?
but any of these we rezone, we're not rezoning and planning on all of them being redeveloped in this cycle.
Yeah.
If we get one out of each overlay, we're going to be fine.
Yeah, yeah. But anyway, the ones on Bay, can we take a look at that, Lisa? I don't know why we didn't really look at that.
Well, no, that's in here. That was map number 2, I think.
Correct.
Well, I'm not sure.
Yeah, it was map 2. It was map
number 2.
But did she say that was one of the ones that she?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that is something, to Bob's point, I think we need to, have more.
So one lot developed, she's predicting one lot to be developed. That's what I would expect too.
Yeah.
So we'll go with Bay and go with Marsh.
And Oakwood.
Yeah, Oakwood is for sure. Yeah.
So I think that so the process here is going to be, after we decide this, then Lisa will work it up and we'll have a public hearing. I think it's tentatively scheduled for next month. I'm not sure when it is, but I think it's next month. There'll be a public hearing that will announce what we're proposing. I think that when the letters go out to residents, I think everybody that's on this list, I think there's about 50 homes on this list that is in our current staff report of the 7 maps, even though we don't use them all. I mean, they've gotten down to the short strokes, everyone that's on this list. This kind of goes to what Elizabeth was saying earlier. I think we need to have the staff send a personal letter to each one of those 50 residences that were on this short list to let them know that their area was considered for this. And what's currently being proposed is that these 3 areas have this overlay, but I don't want just those, whatever they are, 10 units in the Marsh Road, Bay Road and Oakwood to get a special letter. I think everyone on this list should get the letter, because if I were one of these houses, and if the housing authority comes back and slams us and we decide to expand it to add another one, and we do that in September, and we're like really pressed on a deadline, I'd be really angry if I were in that house and I didn't know that the council had considered it and then decided not to do it and then came back and did it. I think we should let all these people know that we're considering this Because I think we're going to get a big
Yeah.
reaction from people.
So Rick, can I say that map 3, I would like to withdraw that because I'm not considering that anymore for the.
No, I think we're not considering, from the comments I've heard, we're not considering maps 3, 4, 5, or 6. But I'm saying we should still let all those people know that we did consider it. They should know we were thinking about them.
Yeah.
And we were thinking about possibly authorizing rezoning their area.
Yeah.
I agree with that.
Okay. Well, I was talking to some people over the weekend. I said, hey, you got to help me because, I'd like to have your ideas where you would think if you were sitting in my chair, where, given these parameters and they didn't know what was going on.
I've got hands from Lisa and Diana, and we're right now at the 3-hour mark. Lisa, did you want to make a comment?
I can do so after council member. Thank you.
Okay, Diana?
I was just going to say, I totally agree with what you said, Rick, about telling everyone in all the zones, even if we're not going to implement them right now. But I also think what Lisa said about, and that should actually be in our proposal, about proposing HIP so that we can make a stronger argument that we're going to fill our ADUs.
Yeah.
With rentals. And I think I think some sort of specific write-up about that makes our position more credible. So, and again, we were trying to convince them we're making a credible effort. So I thought that was brilliant, Lisa. So thanks for suggesting it.
Thank you. I just wanted to get, maybe before you wrap up, some direction that if you're interested, I heard from several council members at 20 units an acre at the Oakwood site, given its proximity, and then possibly 10 units an acre on the Marsh Road properties and the Bay Road properties. So I'd appreciate direction from the council on that. And then just wanted to let you know, our next steps is we'll be preparing a newsletter or a brochure that would be sent out townwide to all residents, talking about the different programs that we've discussed, the ADU production, the SB9 units, and this limited townhome overlay scenario as well. So we would send that out townwide and we can ask for some input. We can ask if there's any other ideas, any other suggestions. And then we will also be conducting a community meeting. I plan to do that virtually from Zoom to make sure we get the most participants, but that we would go over kind of the same items that would be in that newsletter and make sure the residents were aware of all of the programs the town is considering to meet its housing obligation. From there, we need to draft the housing element, and it needs to be published for at least 30 days before we send it up to HCD. And they have 90-day timeline to review it on a preliminary basis. This is before you've even adopted anything. They have 90 days to review it, give us our feedback. Then we can incorporate any changes, and we can do the formal zoning at that time when we know what the HCD's direction is. And then you would go through the formal adoption process and send it back to HCD by the end of year for hopefully approval.
Okay, and what I'm suggesting in my last comment is when you go out with that general letter that you've just articulated, describing what we're doing, in general and in specific, I think there should be specific letters sent to the 50 properties that are on this list, informing them that their area was considered for the short list of what we would recommend. And for the, whatever they are, 10 properties that we're going to propose the overlay for, that we can tell them, and your property was chosen. But for those that weren't chosen, I think we need to inform them that they were considered at the, at this council meeting, because otherwise I don't want to surprise them in the future. I think it would be a terrible fact.
But we need to say, but not chosen.
But not chosen, that's right.
Okay.
So is there consensus on the 20 at Oakwood, 10 on Marsh, and 10 on Bay?
Oh, that's a good question. So my response to that is, I'm not sure that we could do 10 on Oakwood and have the density bonus arrangement. that would allow it to go to 26 or some number that would allow with a density bonus.
No,
arrangement
you
would
can't do that. Lisa, you're muted.
Well, it's just hard to achieve that high of a density bonus. They would need to have some deep affordability on the units, but I could take a look at that.
Yeah, whatever, then you should recommend what you think makes sense that would get us there with a density bonus.
But he's got 1.6 acres. So even at that, it's going to be 16 without a density bonus. And so all we're giving it is a four or five additional units with a density bonus.
Yeah, so she just needs to look at that.
Lisa, I don't think you can get five more units with a density bonus, can you?
It depends on the percent of the units that are set aside as affordable and at the income categories. So the higher the percentage and the lower the income, the more number of bonus units you get. There's a
make it 20. Let's just make it 20 for them.
I agree. 20 there and 20 on Marsh Road.
No,
Marsh Road is Marsh Road. 20 on Marsh Road is, if you're going to do it on Oakwood, you for sure can do it on Marsh Road.
No, the property on Oakwood is 1.8 acres. On Marsh Road, you have properties that are half an acre.
I don't care. It's on Marsh Road.
Well, he's not saying 20 housing on a half acre.
That's true. It's 10.
Correct. It's the ratio. Thank you.
The ratio.
Right.
20 and 10. 20 and 10.
20 and 10 what?
20 on Oak Grove or Oakwood and 10 on Marsh Road and Bay.
Oh.
Oh,
Because
wait a minute.
smaller.
Marsh Road and Bay? You mean Ringwood?
No, it's Bay.
Ringwood and
It's
Bay.
Bay and Ringwood.
Bay
It's
and Ringwood,
Bay.
yeah.
I think they all face on Bay.
And then there's Marsh Road.
I support 10 on Bay Road.
Yes.
But I think you can go 20 and should go 20 on Marsh Road.
If you've got an acre.
I don't agree with that.
That's okay. If you've got an acre or more.
I don't agree with that.
Okay.
How many properties on March?
Can
That
we-
was
can we
only
take them-
4?
Can we take them one at a time?
I'm
Oakwood
jumping
is
through
20.
because I've lost my battery.
Well, Bob thinks 20 on Oakwood and he thinks 20 on Marsh.
Well, can we do them one at a time? Can we swipe them off one at a time? Oakwood, do we have at least 3 of you for 20?
Yes.
Yeah. Yes.
All right, so Oakwood's done. How about Bay?
10.
10.
That's 10.
There's 10 on Bay. And then Marsh.
20.
It should
How
be
big
10.
How big are those lots?
You don't need 20 to get to our numbers. We're going to be way over our numbers as it is.
Well, the
20.
ones on Marsh, there's only one that's an acre. The others are 0.7, 0.56, 0.56, and 0.56. You can't get 20 in a
No, but
point.
it's going to be, it's what do you allow per acre, and whether you allow 10 or 20, it's going to be prorated.
On a half an acre, you could get what, 8 units? Easy.
Well, you can probably put 20 units on a half an acre. It depends how small they are. But if your system is 10 per acre, you'd have 5 on a half acre.
Yeah, that seems small.
It is small. You're on Marsh Road. You're next
No,
to the
that
swimming
doesn't seem
pool
like very
store and the.
I'm saying.
No, but
I'm
there's
with
people
Bob.
that have
We-
just built big houses there that covered their lots with their houses.
Yeah,
They're not going to want
I feel
20
bad for them.
townhouses next to them.
I feel bad for them, but nobody should have built a big house on Marsh Road.
Well, I don't. I think it should be 10 on Marsh Road.
I kind of agree with Bob on that,
When you look at the lots on Marsh, there's 5 of them, but 3 of them I think are long and narrow. One of them is one of them a flag lot, Lisa?
Yes.
Yeah, and then one is a bigger lot. but there's 3 of them that are long and narrow. So I think those would be kind of hard to develop into
A
20
lot.
units per acre.
Yeah,
Anyway.
I think it should be the smaller one.
I
10.
would vote for 10 on Marsh Road.
Yeah, me too.
If it gets us through this unit, I'll vote for 10. Okay.
Done.
Okay.
All right.
Okay. This is just direction, right, George?
That is correct.
Okay. Are we okay to move on?
Yes, please.
Okay, we're moving on to the last item on the agenda, which is item 18, which is the joint meeting agenda topic with the Fire District Board.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of the council. As you know, we have tried over the last number of years, probably 3 or 4 years, to meet, pandemic aside, annually with the Menlo Park Fire Protection District to collaborate on issues that are both from a policy perspective and a practical perspective as they relate to the town and fire safety. Staff from both agencies work well together, and over the years, it's been very helpful for the policy boards to meet jointly to discuss common interest issues. Typically, that's a 2-hour meeting, and the liaisons and staff, in other words, the fire chief and their board liaison, and then myself and the council liaisons will meet to talk about what agenda topics could be on that meeting and narrow that list down. And in advance of that, the board and the council meet to talk about the big picture issues to try and give direction to the liaisons for that meeting. We are also trying to schedule that joint meeting in terms of a timeline, but we're waiting for both the board and the district, or the board and the council to meet to talk about their agenda items first. Councilmember Hawkins Manuelian attended last night's meeting of the fire board where they talked about their issues that they would like to put on the agenda. The list that's in the staff report in broad strokes includes what I've heard from council members as well as what I've heard from their liaison through an email exchange. And that concludes the staff report. It's appropriate for the council to give direction to the subcommittee or the liaisons to take that list forward or a shorter list forward.
Okay, questions?
Can someone put up the list of items we're talking about on the screen so we all see them at the same time?
Okay, Diana?
So the goal here is to try to shorten this list. Some of the things on the list are from them and some are from us. So then the next step is to meet with them and narrow the list down again, and then create a goal for the meeting. So our goal right here is to look at this list and narrow it down.
Yeah, that's what they
And
said.
how many?
I don't think we can deal with more than 2 or 3 items at the meeting. I mean, correct me, Diana, Elizabeth, you're the liaisons. If you guys think we can do more, let us know. But my experience in the past with the fire board meetings is that 3 items is the absolute maximum you get through.
I would argue that some of these are subcategories of a bigger category.
Mm-hmm.
So we could make the list shorter by lumping them together to some degree.
I think that's true that the trailers can go under the adapt.
Yeah. And also the use of zone haven is can also go under
wildfire.
Wildfire's a little bit separate because they're talking about wildfire risk up at Welsh Road. That was one they put on, not us. So maybe it's useful for this group to hear what came from them versus us.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So George, you want to tell us which I don't have the other list that they gave us.
Okay. So wildfire safety and preparedness was one of their items.
Yeah.
Emergency Operations Center is an amalgamation of their items. There was a comment about whether there is a need for a brick and mortar EOC or whether we needed an EOC at all here locally. So that's one of their items. The zone haven is one of their items, and the LRAD, the last item on the list, is one of their items. LRAD you've heard before.
Well, I certainly have an opinion on some of these.
Okay, well, let me just take the questions first. Bill, do you have a question or you have a comment?
No, I was going to comment on their list and.
Okay, let me see if there's any public comment. I don't see any public comment. So Diana, then Bill.
Okay, the item number one, the discussion of that report, I would take that off. And the reason being is that at their meeting last night, they decided there's a big issue around this report, and they're trying to make it be just a, a rough draft. And they're calling for community meetings to discuss it. There was a big debate about whether they would even use the report to as an anchor for the meeting or not. So I would take that one right off because I think the report does not have the board support and doesn't really exist. I would say from my perspective, the way they handled it, I would have done it differently because the report did have some good information in it, which is ending up being thrown out. But let's wait and see what they do with that, because they're calling for community meetings where they're going to invite all the people from ADAPT, from Menlo Park Ready, and whatever the East Palo Alto one is. So they're basically going to regroup and redo that. So I would take that one right off because it's a snake. It's a basket of snakes, and it's not going to, I don't want to waste our time on it.
I agree.
Okay, number two is their item. So let's let them keep that item. That wouldn't make it the top of my list.
I agree.
The third item would make the top of my list, and which is the support for local ADAPT and CERT programs. And I say that because in that constant report, they pointed out some things that need to be changed about CERT. And I think that we can address under a discussion of the CERT and ADAPT. So I'd roll that under there. So we're not losing the items that were good out of the report. And I also think that the use of Zone Haven would come under that, because that Zone Haven, in case you don't know, is the emergency alert system that tells you where to go. So if there's a fire, it'll tell me where to go as an individual, like what are my safe routes out of town. Right now, I don't know how far it's implemented. Last I heard, it was only at the level of the firefighters using it. But once they roll that thing out, it's going to be an incredibly great tool, because you'll be able to look on your phone where to go. So we want to give support for that. But I would move that item as under support for the community. And the last item I would take off the list, which is the ARAD. As much as I support ARAD, but we've talked about it many, many times. And so I think that if we have a limited window, I would take that one off for now. And the other one I would take off on our side is Emergency Operations Center. Let's let them keep that if they want. I asked George, the only reason for us to have it on our list is if we were asking them for something. But George, when I asked George that question, he didn't have a list of demands of what we want them to do for that. So I would take that off our list.
Hey, Bill.
Okay, so, they've had these studies done before, and then of course, when they say anything bad about the operation, then they say, well, we don't want to talk about it. There's lots of problems with it. I'd like to see the discussion of the emergency preparation report. I think it's a good report, and we should be discussing it. I'm not in favor of wildfire safety and preparedness, because first off, when we've asked, despite the fact that Mr. Carpenter always said, oh, we can have a wildfire here. When we asked the fire marshal, are we in a wildfire area? He said, no. And he said, and you don't want to even be in one or discuss it like you are in one, because your insurance rates will go through the roof if you could even get insurance. And so, we're not in a wildfire area. And so I just don't think that we should be spending time on it. Support for ADAP, I'm in favor of that. And I agree that a lot of other things could roll into that. The EOC comment, I'm really surprised that they want to bring that up, because they continue to bring it up and don't think that we need to have one, but they want us to say, oh, well, we'll be part of yours. So I'm not in favor of EOC discussions. again, I think that those two items would take up pretty much an hour and a half to almost 2 hours. And because so many other things could be wrapped into the ADAP cert thing, which would be, trailers and, funding of the ADAP program and, and other participations like, their communications, not necessarily the long range communications, but just the lessons learned that we had from our communications test that we did a couple months ago and what we can do to improve that. So again, that could also be rolled up into CERT. So many things can be rolled up into ADAP and CERT. And I'd like to hear their position on the emergency prep report.
Well, what I was going to say was that I thought the three that were the most important were the emergency prep report, wildfire safety, and the adapt and cert programs. And I'd probably put the support for local programs at the top. And I think we can put other things under it. If they're just going to attack the constant associates report, then I don't know how valuable it's going to be as a joint discussion item.
That was the point I was trying to make. And if we do want to put it there, we should have wording to say what their recommendations were. So I don't want us to get stuck. I've sat through 2 meetings now where all they did was argue about the report and never got into the specifics of the report in terms of what it recommends. So if we're going to discuss it, we should say, what were the recommendations, not just discuss a report, or we'll spend the whole meeting spinning our wheels the way they have. So I would take it off, but make sure it's somehow brought up. If we're going to put it on, then I would make sure we're asking to discuss the recommendations that came from that report.
But it sounds like they're not willing to discuss the recommendations. They just want to kibbutz about the report because the recommendations are critical of them.
Well, to be more concrete, because not everyone here maybe knows about this, but the parts that were offensive about it, and there were some, there was a whole section where they were quoting from one of the, I guess it was a staff report or a staff strategic plan that said that the fire, basically, I'm paraphrasing, but basically that they don't have to answer to the citizens. And so that was like a deal stopper for the board. They're like, you can't say that, but that was in the report. And they said, and when they were reviewing it, they said, well, who is that quote from? And the people that prepared the report said it was not from a person, it was from a strategic plan. So that was one of the negative things that was revealed. On the other hand, there were some actual recommendations that came out that we really should act on. For example, they were talking about how the CERT volunteers are tracked. And the other recommendation, I'm sorry, that was a bad one in my opinion, is that they are proposing a train and release program for CERT people. And what that would mean for ADAPT is that we don't have a way of knowing who the CERT people are in our community. So in order to make a creative plan going forward, we're going to have to know that. So not to get too much into the weeds, I guess the point I'm saying is that they have not had a real discussion about the actual good points that are in there. They just threw up their hands at the big ones and said, all right, let's start over. And a lot of people question the way the report was done and that it wasn't valid, that not enough input was given. So if you talk about the report, it's going to go to, well, is the report valid because we didn't interview enough people or the right people? And that's not what we want to talk about. If we want to talk about, we should discuss what the recommendations were and should any of those be implemented. So if we want to put it in there, let's put it on record, let's frame it that way.
Okay, I agree with that.
I mean, I think both that we're going to need to approve what the agenda is and their board is. And given the way that they've addressed this report up to now, I can't believe they're going to allow that to be on the agenda.
I agree with that. I agree. But if we say the recommendations, then you're spinning it a different way. Now
Okay.
you're talking about what were those recommendations? And I sat on 2 of those meetings. They never really got into the weeds of what the recommendations.
Okay.
So if we take it off, it won't go on at all. So our debate is, do we put it on as far as asking to discuss the recommendations or not?
Yeah, recommendations, that would be good. Recommendations from the report, not the critical part. And see what they say.
So we're saying recommendations from the report, support for ADAPT and CERT. There's one other item here I'd like us to talk about, which we kind of glossed over, is fire district financial support for local safety related projects. I don't know about these, but a couple times people have mentioned a safety project somewhere. And maybe we should talk about that for a minute before we take it off, and how important it was that we wanted that. Can someone?
Sure.
Address
So
that?
some of these were related to assisting the town with relocation of our communications antenna. This is connected to the EOC in some way, but for the police communications network, not related to the comm for ADAPT. Some of it was also related to public safety projects, such as relocation of or installation of a hawk beacon up on Alameda de las Pulgas at Camino al Lago, or another hawk beacon perhaps on Selby, but other areas that the fire district could provide financial support for. They paid for the existing hawk beacons, or at least one of them, rather, to Almondrell.
They paid for half of the one at Almondrell.
Right.
So
those little things.
wasn't there also something that had to do with an overlay or a piece of property or something that someone was bringing up in the past, and I didn't know what it was, and then we didn't talk it through? But these projects, if they're important to us, they should be on this list.
They bought a lot next to their station on Almondrell for expansion purposes.
Which they turned into a garage.
Yeah, well, yeah.
Well, the other one was that they kept complaining because one of their other reports was critical of them, that they could not make their response time numbers to the far ends of Lindenwood. And they put that on us and said, well, we can't get through the back end of Lindenwood. You guys need to open it up. So we got an easement. We got approval on an easement. And we said, feel free. And they haven't done anything since.
No.
Diana, that's what we were talking.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that's one I didn't know about.
No, that's not exactly accurate. You're talking about the easement at Bay Road and
Irving.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Irving. It's a Cal Water.
Irving. Yeah, that's been there for 50 years.
Yeah, we didn't go out and get it for them.
We recently made them aware of it because Peter Carpenter kept making a big stink about it. We said it's your job to do it.
There's a new chief in town, and so I'm hopeful that there's going to be some, and new board members, not new board members, but anyway, I think that we shouldn't carry all this old baggage forward. I think we have to be a little bit more optimistic about some good relations.
Totally agree. I totally agree. But I want to circle back that if this is a category of local safety related projects, maybe we should decide that if we really want those, they should be on our list. So support for ADAP and CERT, and then
absolutely that. Yeah.
No, but
and before we go into that meeting, then maybe the subcommittee can delve a little deeper into these so that we have a real ask.
Yeah, okay. I think we have to be specific about what they were. I mean, George has the list. There was discussion a couple years ago about these items, but I think we have to be specific about what they are.
Yeah, and I'm not familiar with them, so we need to like kind of maybe rank them of order of importance to the town. So that seems like that should be on our list. So I would say support for ADAP and CERT, and then for the local safety related projects.
But I don't really know what those are. So I'm happy for the subcommittee to meet and to work out what they would be, but I'm not really sure that there's anything there.
Okay, I don't know either, to be honest with you.
I mean, the two safety related things that I'm aware of deal with Los Lamitas School, which is a hawk beacon or street light being moved from where it is near the fire station down to Camino al Lago. And that movement is included in the whole grant that Anna Eshu's office has supported and that theoretically is coming through. And the other item was there was quite a bit of discussion about safety needs around Encinal School. But I don't think there was ever a specific proposal for what to do.
So on your screen is that partnership opportunities list that the council put together.
Yeah.
And it has a number of items, but they're not priority listed. And some of them have already gone by the wayside in terms of other solutions, such as the quad gates. But there was, grants to public safety programs in support of ADAPT in certain schools. There were bike lane support for bike lanes to widen, because if you get bikes off the street and to the side, then there's more emergency response route. Emergency lane down El Camino, channel cover for the Marsh Road to get the bike and ped off the street. Bridges into the park. The two bridges that go in and out of the park, they're not load rated for fire service vehicles to get in and out. So a financial contribution from them to help support that. But so there's a lot of other stuff on the list, and this was sent to the fire district, and they went through that list with the last subcommittee, and there was nothing on the list that was jointly selected.
Well, I can see why, because a lot of them have nothing to do with how can they give money for things that aren't even on their. It's got to be something in their preview of what they spend money on. So if you're asking them for emergency supplies, or you're asking them to pay for residents' contribution for the ambulance, some of these are pretty outrageous, you guys. I've never seen.
But honestly, Diana, I think this is kind of in light of the fact that there is so much of our taxpayers' money going to the fire district, and in return, what they actually provide for us in services, there's an imbalance there. And I think that's that's how this was created. Okay,
but we can narrow it down to asking them the things they could actually do. So they have to be in the purview of the fire department. Some of those aren't even in the preview of the fire department. So this would have to be
all those things were. You want to ask me one of them? I'll tell you how it was related to the fire department.
Yeah. Okay. How is giving money back to someone on their ambulance fees?
Sure, I can tell you about the ambulance. The ambulance used to be operated by Menlo Park Fire District, and then they went ahead and they outsourced it up, and it's part of AMR, part of the county. And the EMTs in the fire district are actually the people out there, and the fees for that are included and are managed by a board member from the fire district. That's how it's related to the fire district. You have another one?
Wait a second, though. That didn't make sense to me. So I still.
A lot of it doesn't.
But you know what? First of all, we can't decide.
I suggest that the subcommittee look at that old list and think about what new items there are, and if it can come up with any items that they think they can reasonably get support for, we should include it. Otherwise, we shouldn't include this item on the discussion.
Okay.
I think we shouldn't have it on the discussion because it's a dead issue.
Yeah, it's old news.
And all it did was make bad blood.
It sure did.
But if we have a legitimate request for a safety project, we should put it forward.
Well,
So
why don't you and Elizabeth talk about it and
Excellent.
propose something?
Excellent.
Sounds good.
Okay.
So the direction is the subcommittee, along with me, I want to be part of that conversation. Meet to fine tune the fiscal recommendations, but you also include recommendations from the Constant Awareness Report, and then also support for ADAPT, trailers, CERT funding, training, operations, and things like that, that fall into that ADAPT category, communications as well. Those 3 items.
Well, and I'd say the safety projects, if any.
If any.
They've got to decide. It may be only 2 items.
Right. And those, the subcommittee and liaisons then meet and narrow down and interface with the fire district, because they're going to have their own list of items
Right.
that may or may not match. And we're going to whittle that down to 2 or 3 items to talk about at the meeting.
Right.
And so it's
Sounds
not going to
good.
come back to the council for approval before we set the annual meeting date.
Okay.
Okay.
I think
All right.
that's okay.
I'm clear.
All right, motion to adjourn.
Second.
Okay.
All right. Good night, everyone.
Good night.
Thanks, everybody.
Hey, George, thanks a lot for all your help. Boy, you are really quick with your research.
Absolutely. I agree with that.
Thank you, everybody.
I could barely talk and chew
Bye.
gum at the same time. No, that's walk and to